Hello everyone and welcome back to the Horror Hut. Now, I know a lot of you use these videos to sleep, so before you drift off I thought it would be a nice idea if everyone can leave a comment and let me know where you are listening from in the world. Also like and subscribe if you are enjoying the episodes. Right, let's get comfy and relax and let's begin. I hired a contractor to fix my roof last fall. I'd been putting it off for a while, but after a big storm, water started dripping into the corner of my bedroom. I didn't have much choice anymore. I found the guy online, through one of those sites where you can check reviews. His ratings were decent, and he seemed professional when I talked to him on the phone. The first day he came by, everything was normal. He was in his early 40s, stocky, with a beard that looked like it hadn't been trimmed in a while. His truck was full of tools, and he brought a ladder. He seemed to know what he was doing. We walked around the house while he pointed out some areas that might need work. He even said he could give me a discount since it didn't look like it'd take more than a few days. I work from home, so I was there while he worked on the roof. At first, it was fine. He'd knock on the door if he needed anything, like access to the attic or an outlet for his tools. He made small talk, asking what I did for work and if I lived alone. I didn't think much of it at the time, though I didn't answer the second question directly. I just said something vague about having family nearby. By the third day, the vibe started to shift. He showed up earlier than we'd agreed and stayed late, even after it was too dark to do much work. He'd knock on the door at random times to ask for water or to tell me something about the roof that didn't seem urgent. Once, he asked if he could use the bathroom, which I let him do, though it felt strange. After that, I noticed he lingered a bit too long inside before heading back out. That evening, I found him sitting on the back steps when I went to take out the trash. He wasn't working, just sitting there, drinking water from a bottle he must have brought himself. He looked up at me and smiled, but there was something off about it. It wasn't friendly. It felt knowing. "You're here by yourself a lot," he said, nodding toward the house. I didn't know how to respond, so I just said, "Not really," and went back inside. I locked the door behind me, something I hadn't done before during the day. The next morning, he showed up unannounced. I wasn't expecting him since he told me the night before that he'd be finishing up later in the week. When I asked why he was there, he said he'd noticed something on the roof he wanted to check. I didn't see any harm in it, so I let him. But as the day went on, he barely touched his tools. Instead, he kept knocking on the door with excuses to come inside. He needed to check the attic again. He thought he saw something wrong with the fence. He wanted to show me a part he said was damaged. Each time, I felt more uncomfortable. He wasn't doing anything blatantly wrong, but his questions were invasive. He asked if I had a boyfriend, if I'd lived here long, if I ever got scared being in such a quiet neighborhood. I started giving him shorter answers, hoping he'd get the hint. He didn't. That night, after he finally left, I called a friend and told her what was going on. She said I should trust my gut and maybe look for someone else to finish the job. I agreed, but I wasn't sure how to handle it. I didn't want to accuse him of anything without proof, and I also didn't want to cause a scene. The next day, he didn't show up. I felt relieved, thinking maybe he decided to move on to another job. But around 8 p.m., when it was already dark, I heard a knock at the door. My stomach dropped. I didn't have a peephole, so I called out, "Who's it?" "It's me," he said. "I just wanted to drop off some stuff I forgot to give you. For the roof." I didn't open the door. "You can leave it on the porch," I said. There was a pause. "I really need to explain it to you," he said. "It's important. I wouldn't want you to get the wrong materials." I told him I'd figure it out myself, but he didn't leave. He knocked again, harder this time. "Come on," he said, his voice less friendly now. "Just let me in for a minute. I won't stay long." My heart was pounding. I grabbed my phone and called my friend, keeping my voice low as I told her what was happening. She told me to call the police, but I hesitated. I didn't want to overreact. Still, I told the man I was on the phone with someone, hoping it would scare him off. It worked, at least for the moment. He muttered something I couldn't hear and walked away. I didn't sleep much that night. The next day, I called a different contractor to finish the job. I didn't tell them about the first guy, just that I wanted a second opinion. When they went up to the roof, they found tools the first guy had left behind. I decided not to contact him about it. A few days later, I saw his truck parked down the street while I was walking to the mailbox. He wasn't in it, but I knew it was his. I hurried back inside and locked the doors, pulling the curtains closed. He didn't come to the house again, but for weeks after, I kept seeing his truck around the neighborhood. I don't know if he was working nearby or if he was watching me. Either way, I haven't felt completely safe since. I ended up installing security cameras and telling my neighbors to keep an eye out. So far, nothing else has happened, but I still get nervous every time I hear a knock at the door. I was walking home from my friend's house late in the evening. It wasn't dark yet, but the sun was low, and I knew I needed to get back before it got too late. I usually take the main roads, but that day, I decided to cut through the alley behind the hardware store. It saved about 10 minutes, and I'd walked through there plenty of times before without any problems. The alley wasn't long. You could see straight through to the other side where it opened back onto the street. There were a few dumpsters and some old wooden pallets leaning against the walls, but it was mostly empty. I didn't feel nervous at first. I was just focused on getting home. I was about halfway down when I heard footsteps behind me. They were close enough that I knew they weren't just someone passing through. I glanced back and saw two men walking toward me. They weren't running, but their pace was quick, like they were trying to catch up. One of them was wearing a dirty gray hoodie, and the other had on a leather jacket that looked way too heavy for the weather. They didn't look like anyone I'd seen around before. "Hey, wait up," the guy in the hoodie called out. I stopped but kept a little distance between us. I thought maybe they were going to ask for directions or something. When they got closer, the guy in the hoodie smiled, but it didn't feel friendly. "Don't you remember us?" he said. "We've met before." I shook my head. "I don't think so." "Sure we have," the guy in the leather jacket said. His voice was rough, like he'd been smoking a lot. "You were with your dad at that car shop last month, right? You had the blue jacket on." I hadn't been to any car shop recently, and I didn't even own a blue jacket. I told them they must have me confused with someone else, but they didn't back off. "Nah, it was definitely you," the guy in the hoodie insisted. He stepped closer, cutting off the path ahead of me. "You're just playing dumb." I started to feel uneasy. My heart was beating faster, but I tried to keep my voice steady. "I don't know what you're talking about. I need to get home." The guy in the leather jacket moved behind me, blocking the way I'd come. I was stuck between them. He crossed his arms and leaned against the wall like he had all the time in the world. "You're not in a hurry, are you?" he asked. "We just want to talk." "Yeah, just talk," the hoodie guy said. "What's the rush?" I didn't answer. I was too busy trying to figure out what to do. My phone was in my pocket, but I didn't want to pull it out and make it obvious I was calling for help. I felt trapped, and the alley suddenly seemed a lot longer than it had a minute ago. The guy in the hoodie stepped even closer, invading my space. "You live around here, right? We've seen you before. You're always walking this way." That made my stomach drop. If they really had been watching me, I hadn't noticed. I told them again they had the wrong person, but my voice was shaking now. They knew I was scared. "Relax," the leather jacket guy said. "We're just being friendly. You don't have to act all stuck up." I took a step back, but it didn't help. The hoodie guy matched my movement, keeping the distance the same. His smile was gone now, replaced by something colder. "You think you're too good to talk to us?" he asked, his tone sharper. I tried to step around him, but he moved to block me again. The leather jacket guy pushed off the wall and started closing the gap behind me. I was running out of space, and they both knew it. "Let me go," I said, trying to sound firm, but my voice cracked. "Go where?" the hoodie guy said, almost laughing. "We're not done yet." My hand was in my pocket now, gripping my phone, but I was too scared to pull it out. I felt like if I made one wrong move, things would get worse. "Someone's going to come through here," I said, hoping to bluff them. "This is a busy street." "No one's coming," the leather jacket guy said. "Why do you think we picked this spot?" That's when I panicked. I bolted to the side, aiming for the small gap between the hoodie guy and the wall. He grabbed for me, but I twisted away and ran as fast as I could. I didn't look back, but I could hear them shouting and their footsteps pounding behind me. The other end of the alley felt like it was miles away. My chest was burning, and my legs felt like they might give out, but I didn't stop. I burst out onto the street, nearly colliding with a man walking his dog. I shouted for help, barely able to get the words out. The two guys stopped at the edge of the alley. They didn't come any further, probably because the street was busy enough that people would notice. They just stood there, staring at me, before turning and walking back the way they'd come. The man with the dog called the police for me. I was shaking so much I could barely explain what had happened. When the officers arrived, they took my statement and walked me home, but they didn't find the two men. They told me to avoid the alley from now on and to call them if I saw anything suspicious. I haven't taken that shortcut since. I don't think I ever will again. Even now, every time I see someone walking toward me, I feel a spike of fear, wondering if it's them. Wondering if they'll remember me. It was one of those afternoons where I just wanted some peace. I had been stuck inside all week with work, and the park seemed like the perfect place to clear my head. There was a bench by the duck pond I always liked. It was quiet, shaded, and far enough from the playground that I wouldn't be bothered by kids running around. I was sitting there, just watching the water ripple and the ducks glide around. A couple of them were bickering over a crust of bread someone had left behind. I remember thinking how simple their little lives were, and wishing for a second that mine felt that easy. I noticed him out of the corner of my eye before he said anything. A man, probably mid-40s, in jeans and a windbreaker that looked a bit too warm for the weather. He wasn't remarkable in any way. Average height, average build, short hair. If I passed him on the street, I wouldn't have thought twice. He was carrying one of those reusable coffee cups and had a newspaper tucked under his arm. "Nice day, huh?" he said as he walked up. I nodded. "Yeah, it's great." I expected him to keep moving, maybe head to one of the other benches, but instead, he gestured to the empty spot next to me. "Mind if I sit?" It felt rude to say no, so I scooted over a little, even though there was plenty of room. He sat down and set his coffee on the ground next to his feet. For a minute, he just stared out at the water, and I thought maybe that was the end of it. "You come here often?" he asked after a while. "Sometimes," I said. "It's a nice spot." He nodded, like he was agreeing, but then he turned to look at me. "I don't think I've seen you here before. You live around here?" The question caught me off guard. Something about the way he asked felt too direct, but I didn't want to be rude. "Yeah, not far," I said, keeping it vague. "Nice. This area's quiet. Safe. I live a couple blocks over myself," he said. "It's rare to see new faces. Most people stick to their routines, you know?" I didn't respond, hoping that would end the conversation, but he wasn't done. "So, what do you do for work?" he asked. The question made me uncomfortable. It wasn't the kind of thing you'd ask a stranger sitting in a park. I shrugged, trying to brush it off. "Nothing exciting," I said. "Just office stuff." "Office stuff, huh? Like accounting? IT?" "Something like that," he pressed, like he wasn't satisfied with my answer. I glanced at him, and he was watching me closely. I could feel my pulse pick up, but I tried to stay calm. "Just general admin stuff," I said. "Pretty boring." He nodded slowly, as if he was filing the information away. "Boring's not so bad," he said. "Better than stressful, right?" I didn't reply. I just wanted him to lose interest and leave, but he didn't. "You live alone?" he asked suddenly. That's when alarm bells started going off in my head. The question was too personal, too intrusive. I forced a small laugh, trying to deflect. "Why do you ask?" He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Just making conversation. You seem like someone who enjoys their space, that's all." I didn't like the way he was looking at me, like he was trying to read my thoughts. I stood up, pretending to check my phone. "Well, I should get going. Have a good day." As I turned to leave, he stood up too. "Hey, no need to rush off." "I didn't mean to bother you," he said. "I'm just a friendly guy." I forced a polite smile, even though my heart was racing. "It's fine. I just have somewhere to be." He stepped to the side, casually blocking the path. "You're sure? I feel bad if I made you uncomfortable." "That wasn't my intention." "You didn't," I lied, trying to sidestep him. He didn't move right away, but then he stepped back and gestured for me to go. "All right, well, maybe I'll see you around again." I walked away as calmly as I could, but as soon as I was out of sight, I picked up my pace. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of the encounter. Was he just a lonely guy looking for conversation, or was there something more to it? The way he asked those questions, the way he watched me, it didn't feel right. I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see him following me. When I reached the street, I stopped and looked back toward the pond. He was still there, standing by the bench, watching me. He didn't wave or say anything, but the fact that he was just standing there, not sitting, made my skin crawl. I hurried home, locking the door behind me as soon as I got inside. For the rest of the day, I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling. I started double-checking my locks before bed and avoiding that park altogether. Maybe I was overreacting, but I didn't want to find out the hard way that I wasn't. It started like any other evening. I had just finished a long shift at work, and all I wanted was to get home, unwind, and forget about the day. The drive wasn't anything special, Just the usual route I always took, nothing too long or complicated. I remember the road being a bit darker than usual, since it had been raining earlier, but the highway was clear. I was almost out of the city, just a few miles from home when it happened. I was cruising along in the right lane, just minding my own business, when I saw the headlights of a truck in my rearview mirror. It wasn't unusual to see big rigs at that time of day, but this one was tailing me way too closely. I figured the driver must have been in a hurry or something, so I switched to the left lane to let them pass. But instead of passing, the truck just stayed there. I tried to shake it off and focus back on the road, but the truck wasn't backing off. Suddenly, it swerved toward me. I don't know if it was the rain or if the driver just wasn't paying attention, but the next thing I knew, I had to jerk the wheel hard to avoid being sideswiped. My heart slammed in my chest as I veered to the shoulder of the road, barely missing the truck by inches. I could feel my hands shaking on the wheel. I don't even know how I managed to get the car back under control. I just kept driving, my mind racing. It wasn't until I looked in my rear view again that I saw the truck pull back into its lane. It hadn't stopped. It didn't even slow down. It just went on like nothing had happened. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. It felt like my body was still stuck in the moment of almost colliding. I kept checking the rear view, but the truck had disappeared. I kept my speed steady the rest of the way home, making sure I didn't look like I was being followed. The next morning, I didn't think much of it. I figured the whole thing was just a weird, close call accident. I told myself it was over. But then things started to get odd. The truck appeared again. I was getting out of my car at work when I saw it parked across the street. I didn't recognize the driver, but I recognized the truck, big, rusty, with a faded logo on the side. It wasn't the same truck I had almost collided with the night before, but it looked so close that it made my stomach tighten. My breath hitched. I tried to shake it off as just coincidence. There are tons of trucks that look the same, right? It didn't make sense to overthink it. But as I walked into the building, I kept looking over my shoulder, half expecting the truck to start moving. It didn't. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. The day dragged on. I tried to focus, but I kept thinking about the truck. It was almost like my mind wouldn't let it go. The whole time I was in the office, I couldn't stop checking the windows, expecting to see it parked out there again. When I left for lunch, the truck was gone. I took a deep breath, thinking maybe it really was just a coincidence after all. That night, I got home late again. The rain had come back, and the road was slick. I pulled into my driveway, and then I froze. The truck. It was parked at the end of my street, right where the road meets the main highway. I could barely make out the shape through the rain, but there was no mistaking it. It was the same truck. Same faded logo. Same rust spots. The truck that had nearly sideswiped me the night before. I didn't even want to think about it. I tried to tell myself I was overreacting. Maybe it was just a truck that happened to be in my neighborhood. But deep down, I knew this was too much of a coincidence. I stayed inside that night, didn't even go out for a walk. I kept my blinds closed and didn't leave until the next morning. The next few days were the same. Every time I went out, I saw the truck always parked somewhere near where I was, always staying just far enough away to not seem suspicious, but close enough to make me uncomfortable. One morning, it was parked outside my workplace again. Another day, I saw it at a gas station when I stopped to fill up. The worst part was that I never saw the driver. Just the truck. Every time I tried to look for the person inside, there was nothing. The windows were too tinted, and the truck was always empty when I glanced in. But it was always there. I started making different routes to work, hoping to avoid it, but it didn't matter. Every time I turned a corner or stopped somewhere, the truck would appear. It was as if someone was tracking me, keeping tabs on my every move. I couldn't get away from it. I started feeling paranoid. I'd get into my car and check the rearview mirror, expecting to see the truck right behind me. Sometimes I'd drive in circles, just to make sure I wasn't being followed. I couldn't take it anymore. I tried talking to the police, but they said it wasn't enough to report. It wasn't like the truck was doing anything wrong. I was just seeing things. That's what they told me. Then, one evening, I finally snapped. I couldn't keep living like this, constantly looking over my shoulder, wondering if the truck would be there, lurking. So, I did something that felt insane but also necessary. I drove to the truck's location. I found it parked near a convenience store on the edge of town. I parked across the street, out of sight. And I waited. For hours, nothing happened. It just sat there, like it was waiting for me. But eventually, around midnight, a figure stepped out of the convenience store, carrying a bag of snacks. It wasn't the driver I'd seen before, but there was something about him that made my heart drop. He had that same look, like he'd been watching me for days. Maybe he was the driver. Maybe he wasn't. I couldn't tell. But as he got closer to the truck, I saw something else. Another man. A second person hidden in the shadows, watching me. I didn't wait around to find out what happened next. I turned my car around and sped home, not even caring about the lights or the speed. I got inside and locked the door behind me, my heart pounding. The truck never showed up after that night. I don't know if it was a coincidence or if they finally got tired of watching me, but I never saw it again. It was over, but I still think about it. I don't know who those people were or why they were following me, but I hope I never find out. I went to see an apartment last week. It was listed online, and the price seemed decent for the area. I'd been looking for a while, and this one was in a good neighborhood. It was a sunny afternoon when I arrived, and everything seemed normal. The address checked out, and the building was in decent shape. The landlord, or the man who claimed to be, greeted me outside. He looked just like someone you'd expect, mid-40s, a bit disheveled, wearing a worn-out jacket. He had a friendly enough smile, though something about him felt off. Not in a way that screamed danger, just a subtle discomfort that I couldn't place. But I didn't think much of it at the time. I figured maybe I was being paranoid. We went inside, and he showed me around. The apartment itself wasn't anything fancy, but it was decent. It had good space, lots of natural light coming through the windows, and the rent was affordable for the area. I was feeling pretty good about it, despite the nagging feeling in my stomach. As he walked me through the rooms, he kept talking. A lot. A little too much, honestly. He mentioned things about the building's history, the previous tenants, and how he keeps it in good shape. Nothing too weird at first. But then, he started talking about the neighborhood more. A bit too much. Like he was trying to convince me it was the perfect place to live. The more he talked, the more I felt that strange unease creeping in. I tried to stay polite, listening while I thought about whether I really wanted this place. But by the time we got to the kitchen, I'd made up my mind. I wasn't sure yet. I needed time to think. I couldn't just make a decision like that. Thanks for showing me around, I said, glancing toward the door. I think I need some time to think about it. I'll let you know later. The moment I said that, I saw something shift in his face. It wasn't obvious, but there was a change. His eyes tightened, his smile faded just a little. Of course. But you're sure you want to think it over? It's a great deal. It'll go fast, he said, the tone in his voice suddenly colder than before. I wasn't sure why, but I started feeling like I was being cornered. Not physically, but mentally. He was blocking the doorway now, standing between me and the exit. I felt a sudden rush of panic, but I didn't want to seem rude. Maybe I was overreacting, right? I just want to be sure. I've looked at a lot of places, I said, trying to stay calm. He nodded but didn't move. For a second, it felt like he wasn't going to let me leave. That's when I noticed his eyes. Something about them was different now. They were more focused, almost too focused, like he was studying me. Take your time, of course. But, he said, stepping a little closer to me, sometimes it's better to make a decision right away, before someone else gets to it. I didn't like the way he said that. I started to feel trapped. The hallway behind him, the exit door, was too far now. He was still blocking it. I felt a tightening in my chest, like I couldn't breathe properly. I think I'll step out for a bit, I said, my voice shaking just a little. I'll call you later. I tried to move around him, but he didn't step aside. He was still in my way, looking at me too intently. Are you sure? His voice was smooth, but there was an edge to it. It wasn't loud, but it was persistent. It's such a nice apartment. I'm sure you'll love it here. I couldn't tell if I was imagining it, but there was something in his gaze that made me think this wasn't about the apartment anymore. It felt like something else. Something that wasn't right. I tried to walk around him again, a little more forcefully this time, but he didn't move. Hey, I said, my voice louder, trying to keep control. Please let me go. I'll let you know later. For a second, it was like he was going to say something else. His eyes flickered briefly, and I thought I saw a flash of frustration. Then he stepped back, just enough for me to slip by. I didn't wait to see what he was going to do next. I walked out as quickly as I could, closing the door behind me a little too forcefully. I could still hear his voice faintly, something like take care or we'll be in touch, but I didn't want to turn around to make sure. As soon as I got outside, I took a deep breath, trying to calm myself. I walked quickly to my car, locking the doors the moment I got inside. I didn't look back. I spent the rest of the day replaying everything in my head. I don't know what it was, but something felt very off about that encounter. The way he kept pushing me, blocking the door, insisting I'd love the apartment. It felt like he wasn't just showing me a place to rent, it felt like he was trying to make me stay. Trying to trap me in some way I couldn't understand. I never called him back. I found another place a few days later, one that felt much safer, and I've been living there ever since. But every time I pass by that building, I feel a shiver run down my spine. I don't know what that man wanted, but I'm glad I got out when I did. It happened a few weeks ago, a day I won't forget. I had taken the day off from work to just relax. It wasn't anything special, just a normal park visit. It's the kind of thing I do when I need to clear my head. I live pretty close to a small park, not too busy, just a few benches, some trees, and a walking path. It's quiet, and that's why I like it. I had been sitting on a bench, just watching the squirrels run around and the leaves fall from the trees. It was peaceful. But after a while, I noticed something out of the corner of my eye. There was a man standing at the other end of the park, maybe 30 yards away. He was holding a camera, and he was pointing it directly at me. At first, I thought maybe he was just taking pictures of the trees or something, but I quickly realized that wasn't the case. He was zoomed in, and I could feel him looking at me through the lens. I tried to ignore it at first, but after a few minutes, I noticed he hadn't moved. He was just standing there, looking at me with the camera. I don't know why, but I felt a little uneasy. Maybe it was because I couldn't figure out why he was still there. People usually don't linger like that in a park. It's a public space, so I tried not to think too much of it, but something about it just felt off. I stood up and stretched a little, trying to shake off the feeling. But as I walked around the park, I saw him again, still standing in the same spot, his camera aimed right at me. That's when I started to get a little nervous. I wasn't sure what was going on, but I decided I couldn't just let this go on. I walked toward him, trying to stay calm. When I got close enough, I said, "Hey, what's going on? Why are you taking pictures of me?" He looked at me like I had just asked him the strangest question. He lowered the camera slowly, his face blank. "What?" "No, I wasn't taking pictures of you," he said, sounding confused. "I didn't buy it. I saw you. You were pointing the camera directly at me. Why were you doing that?" He quickly glanced around like he was looking for something to distract him, then looked back at me. "I was just taking pictures of the park," he said, his voice a little shaky. "I wasn't aiming at you. You must have just been in the shot." I didn't believe him. I had been watching him the entire time, and there was no way he was just taking random pictures of the park. It didn't add up. I felt my heart rate pick up a little, but I tried to stay calm. "I don't think so," I said. "You were definitely taking pictures of me. What's your deal?" He didn't say anything for a few seconds. He just stood there, looking at me, then at the ground. I thought he might just walk away or apologize, but instead, he just started to move slowly toward the other side of the park. His eyes never left me. I was pissed off, but also uneasy. Something about the way he was acting made me feel like he was trying to get away without saying anything. I wasn't going to let him get away that easily. I followed him, but kept my distance. He didn't seem to care that I was right behind him. He kept walking like it was totally normal, not acknowledging me at all. At this point, I wasn't sure what to do. I didn't want to make a scene, but I also didn't want to just let him keep following me. I kept my distance, watching him as he walked in the same direction, circling around the park like he was waiting for something. He stopped near the edge of the park by the bushes, pretending to take a few pictures of the trees. But he wasn't looking at the trees. He was watching me. I could see him glancing over the top of his camera. I felt a knot in my stomach. I didn't know what his intentions were, but something about this was wrong. I turned around and started walking quickly toward the exit, hoping to get away from him. I glanced over my shoulder a few times, and sure enough, he was still walking behind me. Not close, but not far either. Always just enough to make me uncomfortable. I picked up the pace, almost breaking into a run, but I didn't want to cause a scene. When I reached the gate, I looked over my shoulder again. He was still standing by the bushes, his camera still raised to his face. It was the same weird feeling I had earlier. It was like he was waiting for something. I had no idea what he was going to do, but I knew I needed to get out of there fast. I rushed home and locked all the doors behind me. I felt my heart still pounding in my chest. It was just one of those moments when your gut tells you something isn't right, and you can't explain why. I didn't know if I was just overreacting, but I couldn't shake the feeling that he wasn't just some random guy taking pictures. I didn't want to think about what might have happened if I hadn't confronted him. I haven't seen him since. I haven't gone back to that park either. I don't know if it was just a coincidence or if he was actually following me, but I've been too scared to find out. Something about it felt too intentional. I don't know why he was there or what he wanted, but I'm just glad I'm not finding out the hard way. It happened about 6 months ago. I was working late, just trying to finish up some reports and get out of the office. I usually take the elevator down when I leave, don't really like the stairs, and the elevator's quick. This night, I was the last one in the office, so when I pressed the button, I was expecting to just ride down in peace and head home. But when the doors opened, there was a man standing inside. I didn't think much of it at first. He wore the maintenance uniform, dark blue with a name tag I didn't quite catch. I nodded at him, stepped inside, and pressed the button for the ground floor. I was tired, just wanted to get out of there. As the doors closed, he didn't press a button or say anything. I didn't think it was weird at first. Sometimes the maintenance people just ride along with you. But then, right as the elevator started moving, he turned to me and said, "We're gonna be stuck in here for hours." I laughed, thinking it was a joke. "Ah, really?" I said, glancing at the control panel. The elevator was moving fine, lights on, no issues. He didn't laugh. His face was serious, a little too serious. "Yeah," he said. "This thing always breaks down. We're gonna be here for a while." I felt my stomach tighten a little, but I tried to dismiss it. It wasn't unusual for an elevator to break down now and then, but it wasn't anything I needed to panic over. The building was well maintained. There was a slight shaking, a weird lurch, but the lights flickered and everything stayed on. It seemed normal. The elevator kept going, and I noticed he wasn't looking at me. Instead, his eyes kept flicking back to the control panel, and then to the ceiling, like he was waiting for something to happen. Something about it made me uneasy, but I figured he was just a little on edge. Maintenance workers probably deal with all kinds of problems. But then the lights flickered again, and the elevator stopped with a jolt. I felt the sudden weight of the air in the small space. The floor indicator was still lit up, but the elevator wasn't moving. I pressed the emergency button, but the man didn't move. He just stood there, watching the panel. "Ah, are we stuck?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. I wasn't sure if I was more annoyed or scared. This wasn't a good situation, but I wasn't sure what to do next. He didn't respond immediately, just stared at the panel like it was going to fix itself. Then he looked up at me and said, "Told you. We're stuck. Could take hours." I didn't know what to say to that. I had assumed he was joking earlier, but now it felt real. I tried the emergency button again, but nothing happened. "Should we call for help?" I asked, still trying to keep my voice steady, though I was starting to feel the tension in my chest. He shrugged, like he didn't care. "They won't come. The system's down." That made no sense. The building had a whole emergency response system. There was no way no one would show up. The maintenance crew would be notified, and someone would be there within minutes, right? But this guy, he just stood there, his eyes fixed on the control panel. I didn't know what to do. I could feel the heat in the small space building, the air feeling thicker, suffocating. I glanced at the man again. His hands were clenched by his sides, and his breathing was uneven. I couldn't tell if he was scared or if something else was going on. "Hey, what's going on?" I asked again, trying to keep my voice firm but not make it sound like I was freaking out. "Is this some kind of joke?" His eyes snapped to me, and for a split second, I saw something in them, a weird, wild look that made my stomach drop. "You really think they'll help you?" he said, his voice suddenly low. "They won't. They'll leave us in here. It's always like this. It's always just the two of us." I laughed again, but this time it didn't feel right. "What do you mean, the two of us?" I asked, trying to hide how nervous I was starting to feel. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he turned back to the control panel, messing with the buttons again. His hands were shaking, and for a moment, I thought maybe he was just as scared as I was. But then he looked at me again and said, "We're gonna be here for a while. Hours. Could be longer." His eyes locked on mine, and there was something unsettling about the way he said it. Like he knew. I didn't know if I should argue or just shut up. Something in the pit of my stomach was telling me that this wasn't a normal situation. I felt trapped, like I was in a tiny box with a man who had suddenly turned off. I glanced around the elevator, looking for some way out. But everything looked normal, besides the fact that we were stuck in a box with no way to reach the outside world. I pressed the emergency button again, but still nothing. I tried to keep my voice steady, but I felt it shaking. "What's wrong with you? What do you mean, the two of us? What's going on?" My words were coming out sharper than I intended, but I didn't care. Something about the way he was acting, the way he was looking at me, made my nerves jump into high gear. He grinned, but it wasn't a friendly grin. It was empty. "It's just us now," he said. He took a step closer, and I instinctively stepped back. "Just us in here, waiting. We'll be stuck in here for hours." I don't know how, but I knew I had to get out of there. This wasn't just some malfunctioning elevator. This wasn't just a worker having a bad day. Something was wrong with him, and I needed to leave before it got worse. I didn't know how to get help or if anyone was coming, but I couldn't just stay there and let this guy get closer to me. I pressed the emergency button again, but this time I shouted into the intercom, "Help! I'm stuck in the elevator. Please, someone, help me." I don't know how long it was, maybe just a few minutes, but it felt like an eternity. Finally, I heard someone on the other end, responding to my call. "We're sending someone right now. Stay calm." I didn't look back at the man. I just kept my eyes on the doors, hoping that the rescue crew would get there fast. And they did. The doors finally opened after what felt like forever, and I practically stumbled out of the elevator as soon as it did. I didn't look back at the man. I didn't want to know what he was doing or where he went. I just got out of there. I haven't seen him since, but I still get a sinking feeling whenever I have to ride the elevator. I don't think I'll ever forget the way he looked at me that day. It wasn't normal. It wasn't just a malfunction. There was something else. This happened to me a few weeks ago. It was a regular Monday morning, and I was heading to work. The subway was packed, like it always is, but it was more crowded than usual. I had to squeeze into a corner, next to the doors, and I didn't think much of it at first. People are always on their phones, looking down, avoiding eye contact. So, I did the same, scrolling through my messages, trying to wake myself up. I had only been on the train for a few minutes when I started to feel off. It wasn't anything obvious at first. You know that feeling when you think someone's staring at you, but you're not sure? Well, that's how it started. I kept glancing around, trying to figure out if anyone was paying attention to me. I didn't see anything that looked out of place. Until I looked up and saw him. He was standing across from me, near the middle of the car, just staring. He was an older guy, maybe in his late 40s or early 50s, with scruffy hair and worn-out clothes, like he hadn't really cared about how he looked in a while. He was standing still, holding onto the pole with one hand, but his eyes never left me. I tried to ignore him at first. It wasn't unusual for people to glance at others on the subway, but this was different. His gaze felt like it was on me, sticking to me. I shifted uncomfortably, trying to focus on my phone again. I thought, it's probably nothing. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. I tried to look out of the corner of my eye to see if anyone else was noticing this guy, but no one was. Everyone else was either asleep or glued to their phones. He was still staring, and it made my skin crawl. I kept my eyes down, pretending like I didn't notice, but every now and then I would catch him looking, his eyes unblinking. My heart started to race. I thought, okay, I need to move. Just get off at the next stop and switch cars. That'll be fine. When the train pulled into the next station, I quickly made my way toward the door. The whole time, I felt like he was still watching me, like his eyes were following me. I didn't want to look back to confirm it, but I could feel the tension in the air. I stepped off the train and waited for the doors to close before I moved to the next car. The moment I stepped into the new car, I felt the same uneasy feeling. I don't know why I thought it would be different, but there he was right across from me again, staring. I froze for a moment, my mind racing. How did he get here so fast? Did he follow me? I glanced around, hoping for someone else to notice, but again, no one was paying attention. They were all just lost in their own world, completely unaware of what was happening. I wanted to go up to the conductor, ask them to call the police, but it felt like such an extreme move for something I wasn't sure about. It could just be my imagination, right? But I couldn't shake the feeling of his eyes. The closer I looked, the more unsettling his stare became. He wasn't just looking at me casually. It was like he was studying me. I tried to play it cool, turning my body away slightly, pretending like I was reading my phone, but the weight of his gaze didn't go away. I glanced up at the reflection in the subway window. He was still watching. I felt like I couldn't breathe, my chest tight with fear. He took a step closer. At first, I thought it was just a movement of the train, that he was shifting to find a better spot to hold on to, but then he did it again. And again. Each time, he closed the distance between us. Every time I tried to look away or turn my head, he would keep adjusting his position to match me. It was like he was trying to get closer, without actually saying anything. No words, no excuse. Just closing in. My anxiety spiked. My heart was pounding in my chest. I felt trapped. The train was moving along, but I didn't know where the next stop was. I didn't want to get off at some random station, not with him following me. I couldn't even tell if I was overreacting or if this was real. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. I tried to ignore him, but it was impossible. I felt his presence like it was a physical weight on my body. Then, right as the train began to slow down for the next station, I saw him move toward me. He was close enough now that I could smell him, a mix of sweat and something else, something unfamiliar. My instinct kicked in. This was not just some guy who was standing too close. Without thinking, I bolted. I pushed through the crowd, rushing toward the door. The next stop was coming up, and I had to get off before I lost my chance. I heard his footsteps behind me, fast but quiet, like he was trying to keep up. I wasn't sure if he was going to follow me off the train, but I wasn't going to stick around to find out. My hands were shaking as I reached the door. I could hear him getting closer, but I didn't look back. I didn't want to know what he would do. The moment the train stopped and the doors opened, I was out. I pushed through the crowd of people waiting to board, trying to look calm, but my heart was racing. I kept walking, moving as fast as I could without running. I didn't stop until I reached the staircase that led out of the station. I didn't see him follow me. I didn't look back. When I got out onto the street, I felt the cold air on my face, and I could finally breathe again. I felt like I had narrowly escaped something, but I didn't know what. Maybe he was just some guy who didn't know boundaries. Maybe it was nothing. But I couldn't shake that feeling. I never saw him again. But I still take the subway every day, and every time I get on, I can't help but look over my shoulder. I never really thought about automatic car washes until it happened to me. I had just finished a long shift at work and figured I'd get my car washed before heading home. It wasn't the first time I'd been to this place, so I figured it would be a quick and easy stop. I didn't expect anything out of the ordinary, especially not what happened that day. The place was one of those drive-through automatic car washes, the kind where you just pull in, put the car in neutral, and let the machines do their thing. There were a few cars ahead of me in line, so I had to wait for my turn. Nothing unusual so far, just sitting there with the engine off, trying to kill time on my phone. Eventually, it was my turn, and I slowly pulled forward into the wash bay. I rolled my windows up, locked the doors, and set my phone down. I'd done this dozens of times before. The car wash started with the usual sounds, the rumbling of the machines, the whoosh of the water spraying down. I wasn't thinking about anything specific, I just sat there, watching the brushes move around my car. Then, just as the machines were about to start scrubbing the sides of the car, I felt a weird sensation. It was like I wasn't alone in the car. At first, I thought it was just the water hitting the windows and the noise of the machines, but something felt off. It was almost like someone was standing right outside my window. I turned my head quickly to the side, trying to shake the feeling. That's when I saw him. A man. He was standing at the driver's side of my car, looking directly at me. I couldn't make out much of his features, just a vague outline of his face and body. His face was pressed up against the window, and he was staring straight at me. It wasn't the kind of look you get from someone casually passing by, it was different. It was intense, almost predatory. I froze. For a moment, I didn't know what to do. My mind was racing. It didn't make any sense. The car wash was fully automated. No one was supposed to be outside the car, let alone that close to it. He didn't seem like an employee, and there was no reason for him to be standing there. I tried to ignore him, hoping he would just go away. I focused on the lights from the machines, the noise, anything to distract me. But then I saw it, his hand. He was trying to open the door. Slowly, carefully, as if he knew I was watching. His fingers wrapped around the door handle, and he pulled. I immediately locked the door again, but it was too late. My heart started pounding. I knew something was wrong. Who the hell was this guy? Why was he trying to get into my car? I looked around, but the other cars in the wash bay were too far away for anyone to notice what was going on. I was completely alone, stuck in the narrow passage with this man. I couldn't move. The car wash had already begun, and there was nowhere to go. I was trapped. I looked at the rearview mirror, hoping to see anyone working the machines, but the wash was automated, and I didn't see anybody. The man's hand was still on the door handle. He was pulling again, this time more forcefully. I wasn't sure if he was trying to break in or just see if he could get it open. Either way, I didn't feel safe. I felt like I was in danger. Panic started to set in. My chest tightened, and I couldn't breathe properly. I started looking for my phone, but I couldn't find it right away. The machines were making so much noise, and I was so focused on what the man was doing that I couldn't think clearly. I finally grabbed my phone, but it took me a few seconds to unlock it. My hands were shaking, and my mind was racing. I dialed 911 as quickly as I could, but the call didn't go through right away. I could feel my heart pounding harder, louder in my chest. The man was still there, still tugging on the door, trying to get in. I could see his face now, his expression getting angrier, like he was frustrated that I wouldn't let him in. Finally, the call connected. The dispatcher asked what the emergency was, and I could barely get the words out. "Someone's trying to break into my car," I said, my voice trembling. I told them where I was, the address of the car wash. I could barely keep my thoughts straight. I didn't even know what to do anymore. The dispatcher told me to stay calm and keep the doors locked. She said someone would be there soon, but I didn't know if I could wait. The man hadn't stopped trying to get in. Every time I looked over, he was still there, trying the door handle, his eyes locked on mine. Then, just as suddenly as it had started, the car wash machine started to wind down. The brushes stopped spinning, the water stopped spraying. I was almost done, and the car wash was over. The last thing I needed was for the door to open and the man to get inside. I wasn't sure if he would leave, or if he was planning to do something worse. But as soon as the wash was over and the machine stopped, I saw the man step back, just a few feet from my car. He didn't move toward the door again. He just stood there, staring at me. For a moment, we locked eyes, and I could see the anger in his expression. It wasn't just about getting into the car anymore. It was like he was angry that I hadn't let him in. Without thinking, I shifted the car into drive and pulled out of the wash bay as quickly as I could. I looked behind me and saw the man standing there, still watching, but I didn't look back again after that. I drove straight to the nearest police station, my hands still shaking. The cops couldn't find the man when they checked the car wash, but I wasn't about to take any chances. I gave them a full description, but I didn't feel safe until I was home and locked inside my apartment. I haven't been to that car wash since. To this day, I don't know who that man was or what he wanted. But I learned a valuable lesson: never be too complacent. Even in the most routine, ordinary situations, you never know who might be watching. I never thought much about receiving a wrong number text. It happens, right? Someone sends a message meant for someone else, and you just politely tell them they've got the wrong person. I had always thought of it as a small inconvenience, nothing more. That is, until it happened to me. It started on a Tuesday night. I had just finished dinner and was settling in to watch a movie when my phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number, nothing unusual. It was a simple, "Hey, are you coming over tonight?" I glanced at the message, confused for a second. I didn't recognize the number, but I figured it was just someone who'd gotten the wrong contact. I typed out a quick reply: "Sorry, I think you have the wrong number." The reply came almost immediately, which struck me as odd. Most people would just move on after that, right? Not this person. The message said, "Who's this?" I thought that was a bit strange, but I shrugged it off and typed back, like I said, "Wrong number. Have a good night." For a while, nothing came through, and I thought that was the end of it. I went back to my movie and didn't think about the text again. Then, maybe 10 minutes later, my phone buzzed again. It was the same number. "Wait, are you sure?" they asked. "Who are you?" Now, I was starting to feel a bit uncomfortable. It wasn't just the wrong number anymore. It was starting to feel like the person on the other end was actually trying to engage in a conversation. I didn't reply at first. Maybe they'd get the hint and stop. But they didn't. Another message popped up. Why are you ignoring me? You know who I am, don't you? At this point, I felt a little unsettled. I wasn't sure what was going on, but the persistent nature of the texts was starting to feel invasive. I considered blocking the number, but something kept me from doing it. Maybe it was just curiosity, or maybe I thought it was a simple mistake that could be cleared up. I decided to respond one more time, just to be polite. I don't know who you are. You have the wrong number. I hit send and set my phone down, thinking that would be the end of it. I wanted to move on, but my phone buzzed again, almost as if the person was waiting for my response. Who are you really? The message read. You're not telling me the truth. I froze. What the hell? Who talks like this? I stared at the screen, my heart starting to beat a little faster. The tone of the messages wasn't just curious anymore. There was something demanding about them. Something off. The weirdest part was, they knew I wasn't telling the truth. But I had told them nothing. I hadn't said anything at all except that they had the wrong number. I was starting to get more anxious. I couldn't understand why this person wouldn't let up. Why were they so insistent on knowing who I was? Why were they so convinced that I knew them? My finger hovered over the block button, but I didn't press it yet. Maybe it was one of those random scams or a prank. But then I received another message. I know where you live. I didn't even think about it. I just pressed the block button. My hands were shaking. What kind of person would send a message like that? Who sends a text like that to a stranger? I tried to shake off the feeling of dread that crept over me. I went about my evening, thinking I had put the situation behind me. But then, an hour later, another text came through. This time, it wasn't the same number, but the message was the same. I know where you live. My heart dropped. There was no way. It couldn't be the same person. But the message was too similar. It couldn't just be a coincidence. The feeling of unease returned, stronger this time. I felt trapped. There was no way this was random anymore. They had found a way to get another number. Or maybe this wasn't one person. Maybe it was multiple people. I called the police. I didn't even know what to say. I wasn't sure if this was an actual threat or just a series of weird coincidences. They told me to keep the messages, not to engage with the sender, and that they'd keep a record of it in case things escalated. I went to bed that night with my phone on silent, unable to shake the feeling that someone was watching. I didn't sleep much. I kept thinking about the texts, about how someone seemed to know so much about me when I had never told them anything. I wondered if they had been watching me, if they were somehow close by. The next day, the texts kept coming. It didn't matter what I did. They came in one after another, sometimes even calling me by name. They were getting bolder. You don't want to ignore me, one of the messages said. I can find you easily. You know that, right? I couldn't stand it anymore. I went straight to the police station, told them everything, and showed them the texts. They told me they'd investigate, but they made it clear there wasn't much they could do unless things escalated further. A few days passed, and the messages slowed down. I had blocked all the numbers, and I thought maybe that would be the end of it. But then, one last text came through. It said, "You're not as clever as you think." That was the last one. After that, everything stopped. No more messages, no more strange numbers. I don't know if they ever found out who the person was or why they had targeted me, but after all that, I never felt safe. Every time my phone buzzes now, I check it immediately. I'm always looking over my shoulder, always wondering if they'll come back. I don't think I'll ever fully shake that feeling of someone lurking in the shadows, waiting to step into my life again. It was just a normal jog, nothing out of the ordinary. I've always been the type of person to run in the mornings, around the same time, along the same route. It's peaceful, and it helps clear my mind before the craziness of the day. The route I take is mostly quiet, passing through some residential streets and a small park. I've been doing it for months now, and it's become part of my routine. One morning, though, I noticed something. There was a car parked at the curb near the end of the street. It was an older model, dark-colored sedan. Nothing too strange about it, really, except that it was there at the same time I was running, and the man sitting inside it was just staring ahead, not doing anything. He didn't look like he was waiting for anyone. He didn't seem like he was doing anything. He was just there. I didn't think much of it at first. Maybe it was just someone parked, taking a break, or on their phone. I passed by it like I usually do and continued my run. The next day, I noticed the same car again, parked in the same spot. The man was there again, sitting in the driver's seat, staring out the window. He didn't seem to notice me, but I couldn't help but feel a little off. It wasn't like I was scared or anything, but something about it felt strange. I figured it was just a coincidence. Maybe he was someone who worked in the area or lived nearby. I didn't think much more of it and went about my run. A couple of days later, though, the car was there again. This time, I noticed something new. The man was watching me. His eyes followed me as I ran by, but it wasn't the kind of look someone gives you when they're just noticing someone. It felt intentional, like he was focused on me. And that's when I started to feel uneasy. I tried to ignore it, telling myself it was nothing, that I was just being paranoid. But each day, the car was there. The man was there. Always sitting, always watching. I started to wonder if maybe I was just seeing things, overthinking it. But then came the day when things changed. I was halfway through my run when I noticed that the car, which was usually parked in that same spot, was now moving. The man was driving slowly, keeping a distance behind me. I didn't want to make a big deal out of it, so I just kept running, trying to brush it off. But then I realized he wasn't just passing by. He was following me. I wasn't sure if I was imagining it, but when I turned onto the next street, I noticed the car was still behind me. It wasn't close, but it wasn't far either. Just enough to make me feel like I was being tracked. I could feel my heart start to race. I told myself again that it was nothing, that it could just be a coincidence. But it didn't feel like one. I picked up my pace, trying to get to a busier street, hoping there'd be more people around. The car followed. It didn't speed up, but it didn't slow down either. I took a sharp turn onto a side street and glanced back, just enough to see the car still trailing me. At this point, my stomach was in knots. I didn't want to panic, but I couldn't help it. I kept running, faster now, hoping I could outrun this situation. After what felt like forever, I turned a corner, hoping the car would be gone, but it wasn't. It was still there, moving slowly behind me, but now it was getting closer. I could hear the engine, just faintly. My legs were starting to feel weak. I was close to my house, and I wanted to get there, but my instincts told me to keep running. If I stopped, I felt like something would happen. Finally, I reached the end of the street where my house was, and I looked back one more time. The car was still there, but now it was stopped. The man was sitting in the driver's seat, just staring at me. I couldn't see his face clearly, but I could feel his eyes on me. I didn't stop running. I turned around, went straight into my house, and locked the door behind me. I didn't know what to do. I felt like I had just narrowly escaped something, but I couldn't explain it. My heart was still racing. My mind was reeling. Was it a coincidence? Was he just out for a drive? I tried to tell myself I was overreacting, that I was being paranoid. But it didn't feel like that. It didn't feel like something I could brush off. For the next few days, I tried to go about my routine, but the feeling that I was being watched never really left. I kept expecting to see that same car, that same man, every time I went for a run. And it wasn't just when I was running. I saw the car parked a few blocks away from my house on some days, just sitting there, as if waiting for me to come outside. I started to avoid the area where I usually ran. I took different routes, even though it made my workouts harder. I wasn't sure if he was following me still, or if I was just paranoid. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. Then, a week later, I went for my usual run again, a different route this time. And that's when I saw the car. It was parked on the side of the road, in a place I hadn't seen it before. The man was sitting in the driver's seat, but this time, he wasn't looking at me. He was looking down, like he was waiting for something. It was the same car, the same man. But now I knew I couldn't ignore it anymore. I didn't run past it this time. I didn't take any chances. I stopped, turned around, and went straight back home. I've been changing my route ever since. I haven't seen the car again, but the strange feeling still lingers. It's been weeks, and every time I go for a run, I look around, half expecting to see that car again. I don't know who he was or why he followed me, but I know now that I'll never run the same way again. I was in the library that night, as usual, trying to get through a mountain of reading for my classes. It was around 10 p.m., and most people had already left. The library is open late, but it tends to get quiet after a certain hour. I like it that way. The atmosphere helps me focus better when I'm working. It was just me, the hum of the fluorescent lights above, and a few others scattered around, sitting at their tables, probably doing the same thing as me, cramming for exams. I had my spot picked out in the back corner. It's a little secluded, which is perfect for me. I like the peace and quiet. I'd been there for a couple of hours already, my books and notes spread out, coffee beside me, trying to stay awake while studying for my final exam. My focus was on my notes, not really paying attention to the rest of the room. At some point, I felt someone sit down at the table across from me. It didn't bother me at first. It was a library, after all, and there were a few other people still there, too. But then I noticed this guy. He was older than me, maybe in his late 30s or early 40s. He was wearing a dark jacket and jeans, but I didn't think much of it. He didn't seem out of place at first. He just sat down and started reading a book, or at least pretending to. After a while, I felt his eyes on me. I tried to ignore it. Sometimes you just feel like someone's staring at you, but they aren't. It happens. But then it happened again. And again. And then I couldn't avoid it anymore. I looked up at him, catching his eye for just a second. He didn't look away. Instead, he smiled at me. It wasn't a big, friendly smile. It was more of a little smirk. I didn't know how to respond, so I just looked back down at my book, hoping he'd stop. But he didn't. He cleared his throat, and then he spoke, his voice low, almost too casual for how late it was. "You studying for something important?" he asked. I was a bit caught off guard but tried to stay polite. "Yeah, my final exam for philosophy," I said, not really wanting to get into it. But then he leaned forward slightly, making the space between us feel even smaller. "Philosophy, huh? That sounds tough. What's the hardest part about it?" he asked, as if he was genuinely interested. I thought it was odd that a random stranger in the library would ask me something like that, but I didn't want to be rude. "The theories, I guess. They get complicated. You know, figuring out what all these philosophers are really trying to say." He nodded like he was taking it all in, but then his question shifted. "Do you study alone a lot, or do you have a group?" He asked it in a way that made it sound like he was just making conversation, but something about the tone of his voice felt off. Like he wasn't really interested in my studies at all. "Mostly alone," I answered quickly, feeling the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I glanced around the library, looking for anyone else, to distract me from this weird conversation. There were a few people nearby, but no one seemed to notice what was going on. But he didn't seem to pick up on my discomfort. Instead, he leaned in just a little more, crossing his arms on the table. "You live alone?" he asked, his voice a little quieter, as if it was now something more personal than academic. I froze for a second. My mind raced, trying to come up with a polite way to get out of this conversation. But I didn't want to cause a scene. So I just nodded, trying to keep my voice even. "Yeah, I do." He stared at me, and there was something unsettling in his gaze. It wasn't the kind of look you get from someone who's just making small talk. It was too intense, too focused, like he was analyzing me. "That must get lonely," he said softly, his words lingering in the air between us. I felt a shiver run down my spine. I didn't know what to say, so I kept quiet, hoping he would get the hint and leave me alone. But instead, he kept talking. "What's your name?" he asked. I hesitated, not wanting to give him too much information. But I didn't want to be rude either. So I gave him my first name, as if that was all he needed. "I'm John," he said, still watching me closely. There was a pause, and I could feel my heart start to race a little. The air between us felt thick, like something was about to happen. I could feel the weight of his gaze, and I didn't know what he was thinking. "I bet you've got some interesting things to say about life, huh?" he asked, and this time, his voice was even softer, almost like he was trying to get under my skin. It wasn't a casual question anymore. It felt like he was trying to pull something from me, like he was trying to make me feel like I owed him something. I felt like I needed to get out of there. I should get back to my studying," I said, pushing my books together. I stood up quickly, grabbing my things. But before I could turn away, he reached out and placed his hand on the table in front of me, just barely stopping me. "Come on, don't go yet," he said, his voice suddenly firmer. "I've got a few more questions for you. You can't just leave me hanging after all this." Something about his voice made the hairs on my neck stand up, and for the first time that night, I felt real fear. I looked around the library again. There were a few people still there, but no one seemed to be paying attention to us. The silence around us made everything feel so much worse. I really need to go," I said, my voice trembling just slightly. I took a step back, trying to move away from the table. But he didn't let go. His eyes narrowed. "You can't just walk away," he said, his voice low and cold now. "Not after you've been talking to me like this." I felt my heart race. My mind was screaming at me to run, but my legs felt frozen. I didn't know what to do. What if he followed me out? What if he didn't let me go? In that moment, I just knew I had to get away. Without thinking, I yanked my arm away from the table, grabbed my bag, and walked as quickly as I could toward the exit. I didn't look back. I didn't care if he was still watching me. I just wanted to get out of that library, away from him, as fast as possible. As soon as I stepped outside, I felt the weight lift off my chest. I took a deep breath, trying to calm myself down. My heart was still racing, and I could feel the adrenaline coursing through my body. I didn't know if he was still in the library or if he followed me out, but I didn't look. I just walked straight to my car, got in, and drove home, barely remembering the drive. I didn't go back to that library for a while. Every time I thought about it, I felt sick. I couldn't shake the memory of his voice, his questions, the way he wouldn't let me go. I'll never forget that day. It started out like any other, but it ended up being one of the most unsettling experiences I've ever had. I was on my way to a friend's house, just driving down the main road, when I noticed my car pulling to the side a bit. At first, I thought it was nothing, maybe just the road being a little uneven, but then I heard a soft thumping sound. I looked at my rearview mirror, and that's when I saw it, my tire was going flat. I didn't panic immediately, but I knew I couldn't just keep driving on it. I started looking for a place to stop, and just a few blocks away, I saw a mechanic shop. It looked like the kind of place that would still be open at that hour, and I figured it would be better to get the tire fixed now than to wait and risk making things worse. So I pulled into the lot, parked, and got out of the car, hoping someone could help me. A guy came out of the garage almost immediately. He was in his late 30s, maybe early 40s, wearing a grease-stained shirt and a cap. He didn't look like the most friendly person, but I wasn't too concerned. I just needed my tire fixed. Flat tire, ha, he said, walking up to me with his hands in his pockets. His voice was low, but he didn't sound annoyed or anything. Yeah, I said, I was hoping you could fix it for me. I'm on my way to a friend's house, so I'm kind of in a hurry. He nodded slowly, like he was thinking about something. I can help you, sure. But I'll need to take a look at the whole car. It'll be easier to fix it if I can check everything first. I wasn't sure why he needed to check the whole car when all I needed was a tire change, but it didn't seem like a huge deal. I didn't want to seem difficult. Okay, I said, as long as it doesn't take too long. He didn't respond right away. He just walked around the car, inspecting it as if he was looking for something else. I stood there for a moment, feeling a little uncomfortable but trying to brush it off. I watched him move around my car, but something about the way he kept looking at me made me uneasy. He finally came back around to me, rubbing his chin. You know, this tire looks like it's been like this for a while, he said. It's probably a good idea to check the rest of the car. Let me take a look at the undercarriage too, just in case. It might save you from more issues down the line. I didn't want to argue. I wasn't really car savvy, and I didn't want to risk something else going wrong. Okay, sure, I said, but I really can't be here too long. Can we just focus on the tire? He smiled at me then, but it didn't reach his eyes. There was something off about it. Don't worry, he said, I'll take care of it. Just hand me your keys. I'll take it inside, and I'll get it fixed up. Something about that didn't sit right with me. My keys were in my hand, and I froze for a moment, wondering if I should just leave and find another place. But then I remembered that I was in a bad spot. I didn't know where else to go at this point, and it was late. I handed him the keys, trying to shake the uneasy feeling from my chest. He took them, but instead of turning to go inside like I expected, he just stood there for a moment, staring at the keys in his hand. "You know," he said, "I'm going to need a bit of extra time to really make sure everything's in good condition. We get a lot of cars in here with hidden problems, and I wouldn't want you to get stuck somewhere else with more issues." His tone was casual, but the words didn't feel right. I could feel my heart start to race. "Extra time?" I asked, my voice a little shaky now. "I just need the tire fixed. I don't think there's anything else wrong." He smiled again, but this time it seemed forced. "Trust me. It'll be quicker if I check everything now." I didn't know what to do. My gut was telling me something was wrong, but I didn't know how to back out without making a scene. I stood there, feeling like I was trapped between not wanting to cause trouble and the feeling that I needed to leave. I took a deep breath, trying to sound calm. "I really just need the tire fixed," I said. "I don't want you to do anything else right now." He didn't respond immediately. Instead, he stepped closer, blocking my path slightly. "I'm just trying to help you out, you know," he said, his voice softer now. "But it's your choice. If you want to leave, that's fine. But I'm telling you, you're going to regret not letting me take a better look at the car." I could feel the tension in the air. The way he was standing in front of me, blocking my way, made it feel like he was trying to corner me. My heart was pounding in my chest, and every instinct in me was screaming to leave, to get back in my car and just drive away. I took another step back, looking around the parking lot. There weren't many other cars, and it was getting dark. The place felt abandoned, and the idea of being alone with him there made me feel sick. I think I'll just take my keys back and go," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I don't need your help." But when I reached out for the keys, he didn't let go. He held them tighter, his hand lingering on them like he wasn't going to let me take them back. "I'm not done with your car yet," he said, his voice a little more insistent now. "I really need to check it out. You're not going anywhere until I finish." I don't know why, but something in me snapped at that moment. I felt a surge of panic and anger. Without thinking, I yanked the keys out of his hand, and for a split second, I thought he was going to try to grab me or stop me, but instead, he just stood there, watching me. His eyes were cold now, like he didn't care what I did. He was just waiting for me to leave. I didn't wait another second. I rushed to my car, jumped in, and locked the door behind me. I drove out of the lot as fast as I could, not looking back. When I got home, I didn't know whether to be relieved or horrified by what had happened. I couldn't shake the feeling that he had been trying to trap me somehow, to keep me there longer than I was comfortable with. I'll never know what he really had planned, but I can't forget the way he wouldn't let go of my keys, the way he tried to block me from leaving. I never went back to that shop. I don't even know if that guy was really a mechanic. I still get nervous whenever I have to stop for car trouble, always wondering if I'll end up in the same situation again. I've been trying to forget what happened, but it's one of those things that sticks with you no matter how much time passes. I don't know if it's because I was too tired to think clearly, or if something in my gut knew I should have been more cautious. I wish I had listened to that voice. It was late. I had stayed behind in the library longer than I planned, finishing up some work for a class I was struggling in. The building was nearly empty, and by the time I packed up and made my way down the halls, the place felt eerily quiet. The hallway lights flickered a bit, and I could hear the hum of the air conditioning, but other than that, it was dead silent. I wasn't really thinking about how late it was. I was just focused on getting out of there. I had parked my car in the lot behind the building, and the thought of walking home after a long day of classes didn't sound too great. All I wanted was to leave and get some sleep. I reached the main stairwell that led down to the first floor, where the exit was. It's the one I always use because it's the most convenient, and the building's not that big. But when I got there, the door was blocked off with a thick plastic sheet. There were signs taped to it that said something about construction work or repairs. I wasn't really paying attention to the details. I had already been walking for a while, and I just wanted to get out of the building. I knew I could use the back stairwell. It wasn't far from where I was. It wasn't ideal, but I wasn't about to go all the way to the other end of the building just to use another stairwell. I decided to cut through the back halls instead. The back stairwell was dimly lit, and it was tucked away behind a set of heavy metal doors. It always had that musty and used smell. I pushed open the door and stepped inside. The sound of my footsteps echoed in the narrow space, and for a moment I felt a little off. Like I shouldn't be there, but I shook it off. It was just a back stairwell. Nothing out of the ordinary. As I walked down the stairs, I tried to ignore the strange sensation that was creeping up on me. The place felt so still, so quiet. It was like the whole world had shut down for the night, and the only noise was the sound of my feet on the steps. I was almost halfway down when I thought I heard something. At first, I wasn't sure if it was my imagination. Maybe I had just been too tired, but then I heard it again. The sound of a shuffle or a soft movement. I stopped. My heart rate picked up. I could feel my breath getting shallow. The back stairwell was always empty. The building was so old, and there was no reason for anyone to be using it at that hour. But there was someone down there. I told myself it was probably just someone passing through, maybe another student who'd taken a wrong turn, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I took a few more steps, moving quietly now, trying to get to the bottom without making too much noise. That's when I saw him. I don't know how he had gotten there. He was standing at the bottom of the stairs, just inside the small landing area where the door to the next floor was. His back was to me, but I could tell he was just standing there, waiting. At first, I froze, unsure what to do. Should I turn around and go back? Should I keep going down and pretend like nothing was wrong? I felt a surge of panic rise in my chest, but I couldn't make myself move. He shifted then, just slightly, and I could see his face. He had a hood on, but his features were still visible, sharp cheekbones, dark hair, and an expression that made me want to throw up. He was smiling. It wasn't the kind of smile you give when you're happy to see someone. It was something else. Something darker. I wanted to call out, to ask him if he was okay, but my voice caught in my throat. I had no idea who he was, but I knew that smile wasn't a good sign. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and my body screamed at me to turn around, to run back up the stairs and get out of there, but I couldn't. I was paralyzed. He took a step forward, and it was like the world slowed down. I could hear my heartbeat pounding in my ears. He didn't say anything, but I knew he was aware of me. And the way he was standing, it was like he was waiting for me to come down to him. He didn't seem like he was in a hurry, or even that he was scared. He just stood there, like he was waiting for something. I thought about running up the stairs, but I didn't want to turn my back to him. Something told me I couldn't risk that. So, I did the only thing that made sense. I spoke. Excuse me, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Are you lost? He didn't respond. He just kept smiling. It was the kind of smile that made my stomach twist. The kind of smile you give someone when you've got some kind of control over them, when you know they're scared. I didn't know what to do. Should I keep talking? Should I try to push past him? But before I could make up my mind, he took another step forward. My body screamed at me to move, but I couldn't. I was too terrified to move. I stayed frozen, watching him come closer, closer. That's when something in me snapped. Without thinking, I took off. I turned around and ran up the stairs as fast as I could, my heart thudding in my chest. I didn't dare look back to see if he was following me. I just ran, and I didn't stop until I was back in the main building. My legs were shaking so hard I could barely stand, but I kept going, stumbling toward the front doors. I don't know what would have happened if I hadn't run. I don't know if he was really going to hurt me or if he was just messing with me, but I don't think I want to know. When I finally made it outside, I was shaking uncontrollably. I tried to calm myself down, but it was hard. I didn't feel safe again until I was in my car, driving away from that building. Even then, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching me. I never used that back stairwell again, and I don't think I ever will. Even now, whenever I walk past that building, I can't help but look up at the windows, wondering if I'll see him standing there. I've always tried to stay calm in situations, but this one really shook me. It started off small, something I could easily brush off at first. A couple of weeks ago, I noticed a van parked across the street from my house every evening. I didn't think much of it at the time. It was one of those unmarked vans, white, nothing special about it. Just there, like a fixture in the neighborhood. It wasn't unusual for people to park around here. My street isn't exactly busy, but there's always someone coming and going, people visiting, deliveries, that sort of thing. But it kept happening, night after night. The van would be parked at different angles, but always in the same spot, always after the sun went down. The first time I saw it, I thought maybe someone had just parked there while they went to visit a friend. Then the second time, I figured it was just a coincidence. But as the days went on, it started bugging me more. I never saw anyone getting out of the van. There wasn't even anyone sitting inside when I looked out the window. It was just parked there. Silent. Watching. I didn't really know what to make of it. I told myself it wasn't a big deal. Maybe the owner was working late and parked there for convenience. Or maybe it belonged to someone nearby who was just visiting family or whatever. I wasn't ready to jump to conclusions, but something about it felt off. Then one night, it happened. I had just gotten home from work. It was around 7:30, and I'd gone for a walk almost every evening after dinner. It was something I did to clear my head. I'd usually walk for about an hour or so, just to get out of the house. So that night, I grabbed my jacket, put my earbuds in, and headed out. As I walked down the street, I noticed the van again, sitting in its usual spot. It was parked across the street from me, but I could still see it clearly. I wasn't even thinking about it at the time, just lost in my thoughts and music, zoning out as I walked. But then, about 5 minutes into my walk, I noticed something that made my heart race. The fan started up. I could hear the engine humming from across the street. It wasn't loud, just a low rumble, but I heard it. And I knew it was the same van. I kept walking, not really sure what to do. Maybe it was a coincidence. Maybe someone else had parked in front of my house, and now they were leaving. But then, I heard the van turning onto the street behind me. That wasn't a coincidence. My heart skipped a beat. I tried to stay calm. I couldn't be sure, could I? Maybe it was just another driver turning down the street. But then I heard the engine getting louder. It was following me. The van was following me. I felt a pit form in my stomach, I kept walking, but now I was trying to be aware of my surroundings. I glanced over my shoulder a few times, but all I could see was the tail of the van, slowly following behind me, keeping a steady distance. Not too close, but not too far either. I could feel the tension building. I wasn't sure if I was overreacting, if I was just being paranoid. But there was something about it that didn't sit right with me. It wasn't just a random car. This felt deliberate. The van was following me, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I made a turn onto a side street, hoping to throw it off. I figured if I changed direction, maybe it would stop. But no! The van turned too. It was keeping pace with me, like it knew exactly where I was going. I could feel the panic rising in me, but I tried to stay calm. I didn't want to make it obvious that I was afraid. I didn't want to give them any reason to think I was an easy target. I kept walking faster, my mind racing. I turned down another block, hoping to lose it in the maze of streets. But no matter where I went, the van followed. It was always there, just far enough behind that I couldn't catch a good look at the driver, but close enough that I could hear the engine running. At this point, I was terrified. I didn't want to look back. I didn't want to see who was driving. I didn't want to make it more real than it already was. I tried to act normal, like it wasn't happening, like I wasn't being followed. But my mind was screaming at me to do something, anything. I turned another corner, this time onto a small alley. I figured if I could lose it here, I could make my way back to the main road without being followed anymore. But as soon as I stepped into the alley, I heard the van's tires squealing as it turned the corner behind me. It was getting closer now, too close. I didn't know what to do. I felt cornered. I was alone, and it was dark, and no one else was around. The alley was empty except for me and the van. I thought about running, but my legs felt like they were made of lead. I didn't know if I could outrun the van or if it would just follow me even faster. I didn't know what the person inside wanted, and that was the worst part. I had no idea if they were just messing with me or if they had something more sinister in mind. Then, just as I was about to lose it, I saw headlights coming down the alley in the distance. My heart leapt. I didn't know who it was, but I figured anyone else would have been enough to scare off whoever was following me. I turned and waved my arms, desperate for help. The van slammed on its brakes, and I could hear it screeching to a halt. The headlights of the other car got closer, and I felt a rush of relief. The van, which had been following me relentlessly, suddenly pulled into a driveway to my left and stopped. The engine died. I don't know if the other car had anything to do with it, or if the person in the van just got spooked, but they didn't follow me anymore. I didn't wait around to find out. I kept walking, my legs shaking, until I finally made it back to a well-lit street. I kept glancing over my shoulder to make sure the van wasn't coming after me again, but it was gone. I don't know why that person followed me. Maybe it was a mistake. Maybe it was all just a weird coincidence. But that van, parked there every night for weeks, and then that drive, it's something I'll never forget. I haven't seen the van in a while. I haven't seen anyone parked across the street either. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe it was just a freak thing. But I don't walk in the evening anymore, and I haven't seen that van since. I can't say for sure if I was in danger that night, but I don't plan on finding out again. This happened a few months ago, and I still get nervous whenever someone knocks on my door. It started with a normal day, like any other. I was at home, just finishing some chores when I heard a knock at the door. It wasn't anything unusual. I get people coming to my door for all sorts of reasons, deliveries, neighbors needing to borrow something, the occasional person selling something. I didn't think much of it at first. I opened the door, and standing there was a man in his late 30s or early 40s, dressed in a neat button-up shirt and khakis. He had a small clipboard in his hand and looked like someone who was genuinely trying to sell something. "Hi. My name is Jim," he said, with a smile that seemed a little too wide. "I'm in the area today demonstrating a new product that I think you'll really like." I nodded politely, still not thinking anything was out of the ordinary. "What is it?" I asked, ready to hear his pitch and get back to whatever I was doing. "It's a home security system," he said. "I'm just showing people in the neighborhood how easy it is to install and how it can help keep their homes safe. I'd love to come in for just a few minutes and give you a demonstration. It won't take long." At this point, I hesitated. I didn't really need a home security system, and I wasn't looking to make any purchases. I've always been polite but firm with salespeople, so I smiled and said, "I'm not interested, thanks. I'm just not looking to buy anything right now." His expression faltered for a second, but then he quickly recovered, still holding his clipboard. "Oh, I understand. But it'll only take a minute, and I promise you'll be impressed. If you just let me come in for a quick demo, I'll be out of your hair in no time." I felt uncomfortable. It wasn't the first time a salesperson had tried to push their way into my house, but something about this guy was different. His insistence wasn't normal. I stepped back, ready to close the door, but he placed his hand on the door frame, blocking it. "Just a few minutes, ma'am. That's all. I promise it'll be worth it," he said, his voice a little too smooth, like he had used this line 100 times before. I started to feel the pressure mounting. There was something about his presence that was unsettling. He wasn't just trying to sell me something, he was almost forcing it. I quickly pulled the door back, not wanting to get into a confrontation. "No, thank you. I'm fine. Please leave." He hesitated for a moment, then gave me a soft chuckle, like he thought I was just being polite. "I can see you're busy, but it's really quick. I'm not asking you to buy anything. Just let me show you, and you'll see how easy it is." Now, I was starting to feel more than uncomfortable. I could tell he wasn't going to leave easily. He wasn't taking no for an answer, and that made me nervous. I took a step back from the door, trying to make it clear that I wasn't engaging. "Please," I said. "No. I don't want anything. Goodbye." I shut the door, locking it behind me as I went back to the kitchen, still feeling a strange unease. I thought that would be the end of it. Maybe he would go away, move on to someone else's house. But I was wrong. It started with soft knocks. At first, I thought maybe he had just knocked once and left, but the knocking started again, more persistent this time. Knock, knock, knock. The same pattern, steady and deliberate. I felt my stomach drop. It was too much. He wasn't leaving. I stood in the living room, staring at the door. The knocking stopped for a moment, and I thought maybe he'd gotten the hint. But then I heard something even more unsettling. He was trying the door handle. I froze, my heart racing. I quickly checked the locks. Everything was secure, but the fact that he was trying to get in made me feel sick. I walked quietly toward the window, peeking through the blinds to see if I could catch a glimpse of him. There he was, still standing at the door, holding his clipboard. My mind raced. Should I call the police? I wasn't sure if that was necessary yet, but his persistence was terrifying. I stood there for what felt like forever, trying to figure out what to do. And then, without warning, the knocking came again, louder this time, and more frantic. Knock, knock, knock. Like he was demanding my attention. I couldn't handle it anymore. I grabbed my phone, dialing the non-emergency number to the police, trying to sound as calm as possible. I explained that a man was at my door, refusing to leave, and I was feeling unsafe. They assured me that they'd send someone out to check on the situation, but it felt like an eternity until they arrived. In the meantime, I could still hear him on the porch. The knocking continued at intervals, and every now and then, he would try the door handle again. I pressed myself against the wall, staying out of sight, praying he would just leave. It felt like hours had passed when I finally saw a patrol car pull up. The officer got out and walked up to the porch, and that's when the man finally stopped. He stepped back from the door, still holding his clipboard, but now with a more frustrated look on his face. I could hear the officer talking to him, but I couldn't make out the words. After a few minutes, the man walked away, leaving the officer to make sure I was okay. The officer asked if I wanted to file a report, but I told him I was fine. I didn't know what to say about the situation. I was just glad it was over. The man never came back, and I haven't seen him since. I still get a little anxious when someone knocks on my door, especially when I'm home alone. I've had other salespeople come by, but I've never had anyone act like that man did. I know that I'll be more careful now, especially when it comes to letting strangers into my home. I never thought a simple trip to the farmer's market could turn into something so unsettling. It started like any other Saturday. The sun was out, the air crisp, and I was in the mood for some fresh produce. I had just finished picking out a few apples when I noticed a new vendor in the corner of the market. He was standing behind a small booth, covered with all sorts of homemade jars and bottles. The sign said something about fresh jams, sauces, and a variety of pickles. I wasn't in the market for anything like that, but I thought I'd stop by and see what they had. Maybe I'd grab a jar of jam as a treat. The vendor, an older man with a thick gray beard and glasses, smiled at me when I approached. "Would you like to try a sample?" he asked, his voice friendly but with a tone that was a little too eager. I wasn't sure at first. I don't usually take samples from strangers, but it seemed harmless enough. The market was always busy, with people milling about, chatting with the vendors. It didn't feel like a dangerous situation. So, I smiled back and nodded, accepting a small spoonful of what he called his special peach chutney. The taste was good, better than I expected. The sweetness mixed with a bit of spice was interesting, but nothing I couldn't make myself at home. "Not bad," I said, smiling politely. He seemed pleased with my reaction. "I'm glad you like it. It's a family recipe, you know," he continued, his voice low and somewhat intimate. "I make everything myself, all by hand." I nodded, still standing there, looking around at the other booths. I didn't want to seem rude, but I also didn't want to get caught in a long conversation. "Have you been coming to the market for long?" he asked out of nowhere, his eyes narrowing just slightly, studying me. I was a little thrown off by the question, but I answered anyway. "Oh, yeah, a few months now. Just started coming more often." He smiled again, but this time there was something unsettling in his expression, something I couldn't quite place. "I see," he said slowly, as if processing my answer. "Do you live nearby?" I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. His questions were getting a little too personal for my comfort. I didn't want to be rude, but I also didn't want to get trapped into some long conversation where I felt obligated to answer more. I tried to give a neutral answer, keeping it vague. "I live just a few blocks away," I said, offering the most general response I could think of. "Anyway, I think I'll pass on the jam today, thanks for the sample." I turned to leave, but as I started walking, I realized he wasn't going back to his booth. He was walking just a few paces behind me. I thought maybe he was just walking in the same direction, but then I heard his voice again. "You know, there's a nice park just down the street," he said. "I've seen you around here before. Do you go there often?" I looked over my shoulder, surprised that he was still following me. "Ah, no," I said quickly, feeling the unease rise in my chest. "I usually just walk around the market. Not much of a park person." "Ah, I see," he replied, as if studying my every word. "What do you usually do when you're not here? Do you work around here?" At this point, I started to feel trapped. The questions were coming too fast, too casually, and I realized I didn't know anything about this man except that he sold jams and sauces. I picked up my pace, hoping to get away from him without making it obvious. But he matched my pace, staying just a few steps behind. "Just work mostly," I said, trying to sound calm but feeling my heart rate pick up. "I'm in marketing. Nothing special." "Marketing, huh?" he said with a strange laugh. "I bet you deal with a lot of interesting people. Do you meet anyone unusual?" I froze for a moment, my steps faltering. The question felt too invasive, too personal. It wasn't just a casual inquiry. It felt like he was digging for something. His voice had taken on a different tone, more probing, more intense. I didn't answer. I couldn't think of anything to say. My mind raced, trying to figure out what to do. I looked ahead and saw that I was getting close to the exit of the market. If I could just make it to the parking lot, I could get in my car and leave. I picked up my pace, but now he was too close, and I could feel his presence behind me, like a weight pressing on my back. I didn't want to turn around, but I couldn't stop myself. I glanced over my shoulder again, and this time, his smile was gone. His expression was neutral, but there was something unsettling in the way he was looking at me, like he was waiting for me to say something, to give him an opening. I didn't know how to get away. The market wasn't that big, but there were still too many people milling around. I thought about ducking into one of the nearby shops, but that would just put me in a confined space with him. My stomach twisted in knots as I felt more and more trapped. Just when I thought I couldn't take it anymore, I reached the exit of the market. I quickly walked out into the parking lot, my eyes scanning for my car. But before I could make it to the safety of my car, I heard his voice again. "Don't forget to check out my booth again next week," he said, his voice too smooth, too knowing. "I'll be here." I didn't even turn around. I just kept walking faster, not stopping until I was safely inside my car, locked the door, and drove away. My hands were shaking as I gripped the wheel, and I couldn't stop thinking about how he knew too much, how he followed me, how his questions had made me feel like he was studying me, like I was a specimen for him to analyze. I haven't been back to the market since then, and I can't shake the feeling that he's watching me, waiting for me to return. I don't know why he followed me or what he wanted, but I don't plan on finding out. I was traveling for work, a regular business trip, and I had just checked into the hotel the night before. Nothing out of the ordinary. It was a decent place, the kind of hotel you don't expect much from, but it was clean and quiet enough. I remember feeling relieved when I walked into the room. The air was cool, and the bed felt comfortable enough after a long day of meetings. The night went by uneventfully. I set my alarm for 7 a.m., but when I woke up, it was still dark outside. I thought maybe I had overslept, but I quickly glanced at the clock beside the bed. It was 5:30. Still too early to get up, so I rolled over and tried to get some more sleep. I must have drifted off again, but I don't know for how long. What I do remember is the feeling of being half awake, that strange in-between state where you're not quite sleeping but not fully awake either. The next thing I knew, I heard something strange, a sound from outside the door. I lay still for a moment, trying to figure out what I was hearing. At first, it was just the sound of someone walking, soft footsteps in the hallway. That alone wouldn't have bothered me. But then, I heard muttering. A man's voice, soft but clear, as though he was talking to himself. "Wrong room," he mumbled. "This is the wrong room. Gotta fix this." It was odd. The hallway was quiet most of the time. I hadn't heard anyone outside my door when I'd gone to bed, and I didn't expect to hear anything now. The muttering continued, muffled but persistent. I felt a shiver run through me. My first thought was that maybe someone had gotten confused. Maybe one of the hotel staff had come by to fix something or double-check the rooms. But as I listened, I started to feel uneasy. It wasn't the kind of talk I'd expect from a hotel employee. It sounded more like someone who wasn't supposed to be there. I tried to tell myself it was nothing, maybe just a guest who was drunk or disoriented. But then I heard the sound of footsteps again, closer this time, and more purposeful. My heart started to race as I realized a man was standing right outside my door. The muttering stopped for a moment, and then I heard the unmistakable sound of a door handle turning. I froze. The door to my room. The handle was turning. I hadn't locked it. I always do, but this time I hadn't even thought about it. I hadn't expected anything like this to happen. The door creaked and my stomach dropped. It wasn't wide open, but it wasn't fully closed either. The gap between the door and the frame was just enough for me to see a sliver of the hallway outside. I could hear the man's breath now, slow and heavy, just on the other side of the door. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. My heart was pounding so loudly in my chest, I thought he might hear it. I tried to tell myself to stay calm, to think of a plan, but nothing was coming to me. I had no idea what was happening, who this person was, or why he was outside my door. The door shifted slightly again. The man was pushing it, just enough to open it a little more. I could see a shadow now. "Wrong room," the man muttered again. "Gotta fix it." It sounded like he was talking to someone else, but there was no one else around. I tried to stay as quiet as possible, hoping he wouldn't realize I was in the room. I stayed perfectly still, clutching the blanket like it could protect me. Suddenly, the man's voice became clearer, more distinct. "I know it's in here," he said. "I know it is. Gotta check the room." I held my breath. He was talking about me, or about what he thought was in my room. He was searching for something, or someone. It didn't make any sense. The door creaked again, and I saw the shadow shift slightly. He was pushing the door open more now, the gap widening with every second. My mind raced as I looked around the room. I needed to lock the door, but I couldn't get to it without being seen. I could hear his footsteps shifting just outside, the sound of his shoes scraping against the carpet as he moved closer. I thought I heard him whispering to himself again, but I couldn't make out the words. Was he confused? Drunk? Mentally unstable? I had no idea, but whatever was going on, I knew I needed to get out of there. I made up my mind in a split second. I wasn't going to sit there and wait for him to come in. I had to do something. I slowly slid out of bed, keeping my body as low to the ground as possible. My pulse was racing, but I forced myself to stay calm. I couldn't let him hear me move. I crept across the room, careful not to make a sound, and reached for the phone on the nightstand. My hands were shaking, but I dialed the hotel reception number as quietly as I could. The phone rang several times before anyone picked up. "Hello," a woman's voice said, tired and disinterested. "Hi," I whispered, trying to keep my voice steady. "I think someone's at my door. I'm not sure who they are, but they're acting strange." There was a pause on the other end. "What do you mean strange?" she asked. "I don't know, but I can hear them outside, and they keep muttering about the wrong room and trying to open my door," I replied, my voice low but urgent. The receptionist didn't answer for a moment. Then she spoke in a calm, reassuring tone. "Okay, stay on the line. We'll send someone to check on it." I didn't wait for her to finish. I ended the call and quickly moved toward the bathroom. I locked the door behind me and crouched down, staying as quiet as possible. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst. I don't know how long I stayed in there, but it felt like an eternity. Every minute felt like an hour. Every small noise outside the door made me jump. I kept my ear pressed against the bathroom wall, straining to hear anything. Finally, after what seemed like forever, I heard a knock at the door. It was firm, authoritative. I breathed a sigh of relief. "Hotel security," a voice called out. "Is everything okay in there?" I didn't hesitate. I rushed to the door, unlocked it, and opened it just a crack, making sure to keep the chain on. 2 hotel security guards stood outside, looking concerned. I quickly explained what had happened, telling them about the man outside my door. They immediately went to check the hallway. I could hear them speaking with someone, but I couldn't make out the words. After a few minutes, the security guards came back to me. They said they'd checked the area and that the man was gone. They assured me that they'd be monitoring the hallways and would let me know if anything else seemed off. I didn't sleep much after that. Every small sound outside my door kept me awake. I left the hotel the next morning, and I didn't look back. I never found out who that man was or why he was at my door. It started out like any other trip to the store. I needed to grab some groceries, so I decided to head to the local supermarket. I went in around 3 o'clock in the afternoon, thinking it would be a quick and uneventful stop. I wasn't in any rush, just picking up things I needed for the week. I noticed him right away, the man who was walking just a little too closely behind me in the aisles. It wasn't like he was standing directly behind me, but enough to make me uncomfortable. I told myself I was just being paranoid. It happens sometimes when you're alone in public spaces, right? You notice people, and sometimes your mind starts to play tricks on you. I moved through the aisles, picking up things off the shelves, and every time I turned around, he was still there, a few steps behind me. I went to the canned goods section, and he followed me there too. I tried to tell myself that maybe we were just going through the same aisles, that maybe we were on the same schedule. But the feeling in my stomach didn't go away. It kept twisting, like something wasn't quite right. I decided to test it. I walked quickly to the other end of the aisle, pretending to be distracted by something on the shelf. I glanced over my shoulder. Sure enough, he was still there, walking at the same pace, following me. I tried not to panic. People often don't mean anything by it. Maybe he was just shopping. But why couldn't I shake the feeling that he was keeping just a little too close to me? I decided to make a turn into the frozen foods section, hoping I could get some space. As I walked around the corner, I glanced back again. This time, I caught him looking directly at me. His eyes locked on mine for just a second, and I quickly turned away, pretending to focus on the frozen meals in front of me. My pulse started to pick up. This wasn't right. I was starting to feel trapped. I went through the next few aisles, and every time I glanced over, he was still there. It was like he was attached to me. At one point, I turned into an aisle that was empty, thinking maybe I could lose him. I didn't see him for a moment, and I thought I had finally managed to escape. But as I reached for a box of cereal, I felt someone standing behind me again. I turned around quickly, and there he was, just standing there, looking at me. I didn't say anything. I didn't know what to say. He didn't look dangerous, but there was something off about him. Something that made my stomach churn. His smile was a little too wide, his eyes a little too cold. He didn't move at first. He just stood there, looking at me, and it felt like an eternity. Then, finally, he spoke. "You don't look like you're from around here," he said. I didn't know how to respond, so I just mumbled something about living in the area. He nodded, like he was satisfied with my answer, and walked away. But he didn't leave the aisle. He just walked to the other end of it and turned back around. I didn't know what to do. My heart was beating so loudly, I felt like everyone in the store could hear it. I quickly grabbed what I needed and made my way to the front of the store. I just wanted to leave. I wanted to get out of there before anything worse happened. I tried to keep my head down as I moved towards the exit, but I couldn't shake the feeling that he was still watching me. I glanced around as I pushed through the sliding doors, and there he was, standing just inside, watching me. I froze for a second, my breath catching in my throat. I thought I had lost him. But no! He was still there. I quickly walked to my car, hoping to get away from him as fast as possible. My heart was still racing, my hands trembling as I fumbled for my keys. I got to the car, unlocked the door, and just as I was about to slide into the driver's seat, I heard footsteps behind me. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I turned, and there he was, standing at the edge of the parking lot, a few feet away from my car. He was just standing there, not moving, staring at me with that same unnerving smile. My breath caught in my throat. "Leaving so soon?" he asked, his voice casual, like nothing was wrong. Like he wasn't standing there in a parking lot, blocking my way. I wanted to scream. I wanted to do something, anything, but I was frozen. I just stared at him for what felt like an eternity, trying to decide what to do next. He didn't make any move to approach me, but he wasn't leaving either. I didn't want to make any sudden moves, didn't want to do anything that might set him off. My mind was racing, trying to figure out how to get away. Then, finally, after what felt like forever, he turned and walked back toward the entrance of the store, never looking back. I don't know why he left. Maybe he lost interest, or maybe he saw someone else in the parking lot. I don't know. I didn't wait to find out. I quickly got into my car, locked the doors, and drove out of the parking lot without looking back. The rest of the drive home was a blur. My mind kept racing, my thoughts jumping from one thing to the next. I kept thinking about how close he had been, how he had followed me, how he hadn't left until I was almost trapped in that parking lot. I've thought about it every day since then. I can't shake the feeling that something was off about that whole situation. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe he was just some weird guy, but I can't shake the thought that it could have been worse if I hadn't gotten away. I haven't been back to that store since, and I don't think I will anytime soon. Every time I drive by, I get that same feeling, like he's still out there, watching me. I don't know if I'll ever feel safe in my apartment again after what happened a few weeks ago. It started out as a normal evening. I just finished work and was relaxing in front of the TV, mindlessly flipping through channels. I live in a third-floor apartment in an older building. It's in a quiet neighborhood, and the windows face a small alley. Nothing unusual ever happens here, and I've always felt pretty secure. But that night was different. Around 10:30, I heard a faint noise. It was subtle at first, just a slight tapping, like something brushing against the window. I didn't think much of it. I've always been a little jumpy, so I figured it was just the wind or maybe a tree branch. I continued watching TV, but the noise kept happening, getting a little louder with each pass. It wasn't a natural sound. It wasn't wind. It felt intentional. I stood up and walked to the window, pulling the curtain back just a little to peek outside. My heart skipped a beat when I saw someone climbing up the fire escape. I couldn't see their face, just the outline of their figure as they moved up, one slow step after another. My mind was racing, and for a moment, I didn't know what to do. Should I call the police? Should I confront them? I knew I was alone, and the building was quiet. If something went wrong, there wouldn't be anyone around to help. I quickly backed away from the window and grabbed my phone. I didn't want to make any noise, but I knew I needed to call someone. My hands were shaking so badly I had to steady myself against the wall. I dialed 911, but before I could hit send, I heard the fire escape creak again. Whoever was climbing it was almost at my window. I pressed my back against the wall, holding my breath. The seconds felt like hours, but I stayed still, too scared to make a sound. I didn't know if the person was just going to stop once they reached the top, or if they were planning to climb into my apartment. I had no idea what they wanted, and that terrified me even more. I was in a panic, my mind jumping between possibilities, none of them good. Suddenly, I heard the sound of someone's hand grabbing the metal rung of the fire escape. Then, a scraping noise, metal against metal, as they shifted. I froze. The last thing I wanted was for whoever it was to know that I was in here, watching them. I had no idea what they intended, but I knew I didn't want to find out. I had no choice but to act. I wasn't going to just stand there and wait for something worse to happen. I tiptoed over to the window, making sure I stayed as quiet as possible. My heart was pounding in my chest as I peered through the blinds. The person was standing on the fire escape now, just a few feet away from my window. I couldn't see their face clearly, but I could make out the shape of a man in dark clothes, just standing there. I wasn't sure what to do. My phone was still in my hand, but I didn't want to make a noise. I slowly started to back away from the window to grab my keys, thinking I should leave, get out of the apartment, but before I could move, I heard the voice. "Hey, you in there?" It was a man's voice. I felt like my heart was going to stop. He knew I was there. I didn't know how to respond. I thought about running to the door, but it would be too loud. And besides, what if he followed me? What if he was already inside by the time I got downstairs? I needed to stay calm. "Who's there?" I called out, trying to sound confident, though my voice shook. The man paused for a second. Then he said, "I'm sorry. I think I got the wrong apartment. I was looking for someone else." The words caught me off guard. He wasn't trying to break in. He wasn't planning anything violent. But why was he on my fire escape, then? Why was he acting like it was normal to be on my window ledge in the middle of the night? "I don't think so," I said, stepping forward cautiously, keeping my voice steady. "What do you want?" "I'm just looking for someone," he repeated, his tone strangely calm. "I didn't mean to scare you. I'll leave now." But he didn't move. He just stood there, facing the window, like he was waiting for me to do something. I could feel my stomach knotting, my instinct screaming that something was wrong. "You need to go," I said, this time with more force, my hand gripping the phone tightly in my pocket. I wasn't sure what I was expecting, but I had no intention of letting him anywhere near me. Finally, he stepped back, slowly. I watched him take a few steps down the fire escape before he turned and started climbing down the building. I couldn't let myself relax just yet, though. I stayed by the window for another few minutes, staring out, making sure he wasn't coming back or trying to sneak into a different window. When I was sure he was gone, I called the police. I told them everything, but by the time they arrived, the man was long gone. They took my statement, and they checked the building, but they didn't find anything suspicious. They said they'd keep an eye on things, but I didn't feel reassured. I didn't sleep that night. The next day, I called my landlord to ask about security, about the fire escape, anything that could make me feel safer. He assured me it was all secure, that people couldn't get in that way. But I couldn't shake the feeling that someone had been trying to get inside. I never saw that man again, but I can't forget how calm he sounded when he said he was looking for someone else. It didn't make sense. It still doesn't. Why would he be climbing up a building to find someone, if that wasn't his intent? I don't know what he wanted, but I know I never want to see him again. Since then, I've taken extra precautions, locking my windows, making sure the blinds are closed tight every night. It's silly, maybe, but I can't stop thinking about it. The feeling that I wasn't safe, that someone had been right outside my window waiting, keeps me on edge. I don't know who he was or what he was really after, but I know that night will always haunt me. It was one of those rare afternoons where I had no plans. I just finished a couple of tests at school, and my parents were busy with work, so I decided to head to the mall to pick up a few things. Nothing big, just some new clothes and maybe some books. I'm not really a big shopper, but I figured I'd treat myself a little. The mall was relatively empty for a Friday, which made it feel a bit quieter than usual. I was wandering around the main floor, trying to find a pair of jeans that weren't too expensive but still looked good. It was a typical day. Nothing out of the ordinary. But then, as I passed by the shoe store, I noticed a group of 3 adults. A man and 2 women, maybe in their 30s or early 40s. They were standing just outside the entrance, looking around. It wasn't the way they were standing that caught my attention, but the way they looked at me. It wasn't like a glance, like you'd expect from a stranger in a public place. No, they were staring at me. It felt wrong, but I tried not to think too much of it. I kept walking, glancing at the shoes in the window. But out of the corner of my eye, I saw them move, and before I knew it, they were standing right in front of me. "Excuse me," the man said, his voice a little too frantic for my taste. "Have you seen a little girl around here?" "About this tall," he motioned with his hand, "dark hair, pink jacket." "She's about 6 or 7. We've been looking everywhere." I don't know why, but something about the way he spoke made me feel uneasy. Maybe it was the fact that they looked calm enough, but there was this strange tension in the air. The man seemed rushed, but not in a way that made me feel like he was genuinely panicking. He was almost too calm. I mean, what kind of parent just walks up to a random teenager in a mall and starts asking about their missing child? No, sorry, I said, shaking my head. I haven't seen anyone like that. The woman standing beside him nodded, and I thought she looked a little too relieved at my answer. She had this smile that felt forced, like she was trying to be polite, but something wasn't quite right. "Thank you. We can't find her anywhere." "She wandered off and we're getting worried," she added, sounding almost rehearsed. The way she said it made me question if they were really parents at all. The other woman, who hadn't spoken yet, stepped forward, looking even more anxious. "We've been searching for a while, and we don't know where else to look." It's just, she broke off mid-sentence and looked at the man, like they had some silent agreement. Then the man spoke again, his tone suddenly shifting, softer, but still just as urgent. "Hey, would you mind helping us out? We think she might have gone towards the exit, and if you could just check, maybe help us find her. We're not sure where else to go." I'm not sure what made me hesitate, but something did. I stood there, unsure. At that moment, a cold feeling ran through my chest. I glanced around, but the mall was still quiet. No one seemed to be paying attention. Maybe they were just desperate parents, I thought, trying to find their child. But why had they picked me? I should have just walked away. I should have just told them I didn't have time to help. But instead, I nodded. "Okay, I'll look around by the exit." The man smiled, a little too wide, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. "Thanks. We really appreciate it." They all turned and started walking toward the far end of the mall, not saying anything else. I fell in line behind them. Something in the back of my mind told me that I should be cautious, but my curiosity and guilt took over. I kept thinking that maybe they really were just worried parents. It wasn't until we reached the escalators that I realized how far I'd followed them. The mall exit was on the ground floor, but we were heading toward the back entrance, where the service areas were. The further we walked, the more my unease grew. There were fewer people around, and the lights seemed dimmer in that part of the mall. It felt isolated. The noise of the crowd faded, and suddenly, it was just the four of us. The woman in front of me kept looking back, like she was checking to see if I was still there, but she never said anything. I tried to shake off the feeling that something wasn't right, but as we turned another corner, I realized I didn't even recognize where we were anymore. I stopped in my tracks. "This isn't the exit," I said, my voice a little shakier than I wanted it to be. "I thought we were going to the exit." The man turned, his face unreadable. "Oh, it's just a shortcut. We're close." I could hear my heartbeat in my ears. The whole situation was starting to feel wrong, but I couldn't quite put my finger on why. Why hadn't they just gone to the front exit like any normal person? Why had they led me here? Before I could backtrack, the woman ahead of me stopped and looked over her shoulder at me, her smile vanishing. She took a step closer. "It's just a bit further, don't worry. We'll find her. Just keep going." I started to feel trapped. They were walking so slowly now, and the hallway seemed to stretch on forever. No one was around. The silence was deafening. Something clicked in my mind, and the realization hit me all at once. These weren't parents looking for a lost child. They were luring me somewhere. I didn't know why it took me so long to realize it, but I had to get out of there. I turned quickly and started walking back toward the escalators, but before I could get very far, I heard the man's voice, low and urgent behind me. "Hey, what's the rush?" he asked, his voice changing. "We're just trying to help you help us." I didn't look back. I just kept walking faster, breaking into a jog as I passed the service doors, heading back toward the main part of the mall. I wasn't sure where I was going, but I knew I had to get away from them. Suddenly, I felt a hand grab my shoulder, pulling me back. My heart raced in my chest, but before I could react, a voice yelled from down the hall. "Security." I turned and saw a mall security guard running toward us. The man immediately let go of my shoulder and stepped back, his expression cold, almost angry. The woman and the other man just stood there, their faces suddenly blank. The security guard was fast, and within moments, they had them surrounded. I didn't wait to see what happened next. I turned and ran the rest of the way out into the main area of the mall where people were talking and shopping. I could hear the guard calling out, telling me to stay put, but I just needed to get away from them. I never saw those people again, but I was shaken. It took me weeks to feel normal again, to trust that when I saw someone in public asking for help, I wouldn't instantly be reminded of that moment. It wasn't until later, when I was talking to one of my friends, that I realized just how lucky I was. Apparently, there had been a series of similar incidents at local malls over the past few months, people getting lured into quiet, isolated areas and disappearing. No one knew exactly what happened, but I guess I just got out in time. I don't go to that part of the mall anymore. I still think about it sometimes, and I've learned to trust that gut feeling that something's wrong, even if it's just a small voice in the back of my head. It was the one thing that saved me. It had been a long shift. The kind where you count down the minutes, just waiting for the clock to hit closing time. It wasn't that I didn't like my job, I did, but by the end of the night, I was always ready to be done. The store was quiet, the lights had been dimmed, and the last of the shoppers had trickled out long ago. I was just finishing up, wiping down the counters and checking the inventory list one last time. The store felt empty, just how I liked it after a hectic day. I was about to lock the front door when I saw someone approaching from the parking lot. It was a man, in his early 40s maybe, dressed in a jacket and jeans. He was walking quickly, and as he reached the door, I could already feel that uncomfortable pressure in the pit of my stomach. It wasn't anything specific, he didn't seem threatening at first. He was just alone, and I'd already done the closing checklist, which meant I was almost ready to leave. I paused for a moment, hesitating. The store was technically closed, but I had let people in after hours before, especially if they were quick and respectful. It wasn't the ideal situation, but I figured one more customer wouldn't hurt. I didn't expect any problems. I unlocked the door a crack, peeking out. "Hey, sorry, we're just about to close for the night," I said, giving him a polite smile. He looked at me, his expression neutral, but there was something about the way he glanced at the door like he was already calculating how much time he had. "Oh, I'm really sorry to bother you," he said quickly. "I just need a couple of things. I swear I'll be fast." Something about the way he said it made me hesitate for a moment, but then I reminded myself that I'd let others in before. Maybe I was just tired. "Well, all right. But I'll need to lock up after you're done." "Of course. I won't be long." He gave me a smile, one that seemed normal enough, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. I opened the door all the way and stepped back, letting him in. He walked past me, looking around the store. He didn't seem rushed at all, just strolling in like it was any other time of day. At first, everything seemed fine. He made his way to the back aisle where the cleaning supplies were, taking his time, picking a few things off the shelves. I went back to tidying up, trying to finish my last tasks, but I couldn't help glancing up every now and then, watching him from the corner of my eye. Then it happened. I heard a sudden sound, the rattle of an item hitting the floor, and looked up. The man was standing there, staring at me. His back was straight, his eyes narrowed. I felt a chill run through me. The shift in the atmosphere was almost immediate, like something had changed, but I couldn't put my finger on it. Everything all right?" I asked, my voice a little less confident now. He didn't answer right away. He just kept looking at me, and I started to get that sinking feeling in my stomach. "You know, you really shouldn't be working this late," he said suddenly, his voice low, almost too calm. I blinked, confused. Excuse me?" He took a step closer, and my heart rate kicked up a notch. "Just saying," he continued, his tone starting to change, "you don't want to be alone here. Late at night, in an empty store." I froze, his words cutting through the air like a blade. It was a weird thing to say, but I laughed it off, trying to make light of it. Well, it's part of the job. Got to close up the store somehow. I didn't know why I said that. It just came out automatically. But the smile that appeared on his face was no longer friendly. It was tight, almost forced, and the way he looked at me made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. "Yeah," he said, voice lowering. "I bet you do. You better lock the door when I leave, though. Don't want anyone else coming in." I felt a bead of sweat form on my forehead, but I kept my composure. "Right. I'll lock it up as soon as you're done." But he didn't move. Instead, he took a step toward me, and something in his posture shifted. He was no longer a normal customer, but something different, something threatening. "I don't think you understand," he said, his voice colder now. "You shouldn't be working here alone." I wanted to ask him what he meant, but my throat felt tight. I took a small step back, trying to put some distance between us. He noticed. "Are you scared?" he asked, the edge in his voice now more pronounced. I forced myself to stand my ground, though my mind was racing. Why was he acting like this? I'd let plenty of customers in before without a second thought. What was different about this guy? "Look," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "you've got what you came for. I need to finish closing, and I've got other things to do. So if you're done, I'm not done," he interrupted, his eyes cold. He took another step forward, his body blocking the aisle. I could feel panic starting to creep up on me. I had to stay calm. I had to get through this. "I just need to grab one more thing," he said, his voice now almost casual. "You know how it is. Always forget something." I nodded, backing up toward the counter. I tried to keep my hands from shaking, but I could feel my heart hammering in my chest. He turned around and walked back to the shelves, his steps slow now, almost deliberate. My hands were shaking, and I felt the tightness in my chest that comes with realizing something is very wrong. I couldn't shake the feeling that he wasn't just a customer anymore. He was something else. And as he picked up another item, I noticed his eyes flickering to the back door. That's when it hit me. He was planning to make sure I couldn't leave. He wasn't just shopping. He was waiting for me to let my guard down, to let him do whatever it was he planned to do. I started moving toward the back door, trying to keep it casual, but my mind was racing. I had to get out. I had to lock the door. "Are you almost done?" I asked, my voice a little more frantic than I wanted it to be. He didn't answer right away. He was looking at the item in his hands, then slowly turned to face me. "You're not going anywhere," he said, and it wasn't a suggestion. Every fiber of my being screamed at me to run, to do anything to get away from him. I made a split-second decision and bolted for the back office door, locking it behind me as quickly as I could. I heard him curse under his breath, then heard him walking toward the back, his footsteps echoing through the store. I grabbed my phone and dialed the police, my hands still shaking as I explained the situation. I stayed in the office, locked inside, until I heard sirens approaching in the distance. When they arrived, the man was nowhere to be found. They said they'd look into the security footage, but honestly, I don't think I'll ever forget the way he looked at me, like I was just another thing to be controlled, another victim in his plans. After that night, I made sure to double-check the locks, always. It's a part of the job now. But I don't take being alone at work for granted anymore. I can't. The train car was mostly empty. It was late, past midnight, and I was heading home after a long shift. I liked riding the train at night. It was quiet, and I could finally let my mind wander. There were only a handful of people scattered around the car, all lost in their own worlds. A man with headphones a few rows ahead of me, a woman in a corner seat scrolling through her phone, and another man sitting diagonally across from me with a notebook in his lap. At first, I didn't notice him. I was staring out the window, watching the city lights blur into streaks against the darkness. But something pulled my attention back. The sound of a pen scratching paper. Not unusual, but it felt persistent, deliberate. I glanced over and saw him hunched over the notebook, his hand moving quickly. He was middle-aged, maybe late 40s, with unkempt hair and a faded jacket. Nothing about him stood out, but the way he was focused on that notebook made me curious. I shifted in my seat to get a better look, but he turned the page before I could make out what he was drawing. His eyes flicked up and met mine for a split second before dropping back down to his notebook. Something about that glance made my skin prickle. I told myself it was nothing. People draw in public all the time. Maybe he was an artist, or just someone passing the time. But then I noticed something strange. The angle of his notebook was tilted toward me, like he wanted me to see but also didn't. It felt intentional. I turned my attention back to the window, trying to shake the uneasy feeling creeping over me. But I couldn't ignore it. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw him lift his head again, his gaze settling on me before quickly looking away. When the train slowed at the next station, I made a decision. I grabbed my bag, stood up, and moved to the next car. It wasn't far, just through the connecting doors, but it felt safer putting some distance between us. The new car was even emptier, just one man in a suit sleeping against the window. I took a seat near the middle, where I could see both exits. The train jerked forward, and I leaned back, letting out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. But then the door at the end of the car slid open. I looked up and felt my stomach drop. It was him. He didn't hesitate, didn't look around like he was deciding where to sit. He walked straight down the aisle and took a seat a few rows behind me. I could feel his eyes on the back of my head, and my hands clenched around the strap of my bag. I told myself I was imagining things. He could have just been moving cars for the same reason I had. Maybe he wanted more space, or maybe he didn't like the vibe in the last car. But it didn't feel like that. It felt deliberate. The train stopped again, and I decided to test it. I stood up, walked to the door, and stepped into the next car. This one was brighter, with more people. A couple chatting quietly, a man reading a book. I sat near the door, keeping my eyes on the connecting passage. It didn't take long. A minute later, the door slid open, and he stepped through. His eyes scanned the car until they landed on me. He didn't even pretend to look for another seat. He just sat down, closer this time, just 2 rows behind me. My heart was pounding now. I fumbled with my phone, opening a message thread and typing out a quick text to my roommate. There's a guy following me on the train. What do I do? I hit send and waited, staring at the screen like it was a lifeline. She didn't reply right away, and I didn't know if she was asleep or if the message hadn't gone through. The train rattled on, the hum of the tracks filling the silence. I could feel his gaze, even though I didn't turn around to check. The next station came into view, and I made a split-second decision. When the doors opened, I stepped off the train. I didn't plan to leave, I just wanted to see if he would follow. The platform was empty except for a janitor sweeping near the stairs. I stayed close to the edge, watching the doors. For a moment, I thought maybe I was wrong, that he would stay on the train and this would all just be a weird story to laugh about later. But then he stepped off. He stood on the platform, his notebook tucked under his arm. He didn't approach me, didn't say anything, just stood there watching. The doors closed behind him, and the train pulled away, leaving us in silence. I backed toward the stairs, my pulse racing. "Can I help you?" I finally managed to say, my voice shaking. He tilted his head slightly, like he was considering my question. Then he opened the notebook and turned it toward me. The pages were filled with sketches. My face, my posture, even the way I had been sitting by the window. Page after page, all of me. I felt frozen, my legs refusing to move. "Why are you doing this?" I asked, barely above a whisper. He didn't answer. Instead, he smiled, closed the notebook, and took a step forward. I bolted. My legs finally worked, and I ran up the stairs, taking them two at a time. I didn't look back until I reached the street, my lungs burning and my heart threatening to burst out of my chest. When I turned, he wasn't there. The platform was empty, the station eerily quiet. I didn't stop running until I reached a gas station a few blocks away. The clerk gave me a strange look as I stumbled inside, breathless and disheveled. "Call the police," I said, my voice cracking. "There's a man following me." They came quickly, but by the time they searched the station, he was gone. I filed a report, described him as best as I could, but they didn't seem hopeful. "These things happen," one of the officers said, like it was supposed to make me feel better. I didn't sleep that night. Or the night after. It's been weeks, and I can't stop thinking about that notebook. About how many sketches there were. About how long he must have been watching me. I still take the train, but never alone. And I always sit near the conductor's car, where there are people around. But every time I hear the sound of a pen scratching paper, I feel my chest tighten, and I can't help but look over my shoulder. I never thought much about picking up hitchhikers, but it was late, and the rain had started coming down hard. I was driving back from a business trip, and I hadn't seen another car in over an hour. The roads were quiet, and I could barely see more than a few feet in front of me because of the rain. Then, on the side of the road, I saw him just standing there, drenched, thumb out, staring into the headlights. I debated for a second. Normally, I wouldn't stop, but something made me pull over. Maybe it was the way he looked. He seemed harmless, just a guy in his mid-30s, with a rain-soaked jacket and a tired face. I rolled down the window a bit. "You need a ride?" I asked. He nodded quickly, stepping toward the car. "Yeah, please. I've been waiting for a while." I unlocked the door, and he slid in. He thanked me as he shut the door, wiping his hands on his jeans. "Where are you headed?" I asked, trying to make conversation. "Just past Clearwater," he said, looking out the window. "I'll get off soon. Just need to get out of the rain." "Clearwater?" "That's a couple hours away," I said, but I didn't mind. It was getting late, and I'd rather have some company on the road than not. We were the only two cars on the highway, and the rain wasn't showing any sign of stopping. "Yeah," he said, looking back at me. "I've got a friend out there. He's expecting me." His voice was calm, maybe a bit too calm for someone who had just been standing out in the pouring rain for who knows how long. I nodded and kept driving. For the next 20 minutes, there was silence between us. It wasn't uncomfortable, but there was something strange about him. He didn't seem to mind the quiet, and every so often, I'd catch him looking at me, like he was studying me. "You from around here?" he asked after a while. "No, just passing through. I replied. Work trip. He nodded slowly, his eyes drifting back to the window. Yeah, me too. Just passing through. Gotta get somewhere important. I didn't know why, but something about that made me uneasy. It was like the way he said it, like he was hiding something. I kept my focus on the road, trying not to let my mind wander. After about another 10 minutes, I heard him shift in his seat. I glanced over and saw him looking at me, but his expression was different now. Harder. It wasn't that friendly face anymore. His eyes were cold. You know, he said, his voice low, you didn't really have to stop, you know. You didn't have to pick me up. I felt a little chill run down my spine, but I tried to stay calm. You looked like you needed help, I said, glancing at him for a second before focusing back on the road. I don't need anyone's help, he said, and now there was a sharpness to his voice. It wasn't the same person who had gotten into the car a while ago. I just needed a ride, and now I'm stuck with you. I didn't know what to say. Something wasn't right, but I couldn't put my finger on it. I tried to laugh it off, thinking maybe he was just a little too tired or maybe he'd had a rough day. It's all right, I said, trying to lighten the mood. Just trying to be friendly. He didn't respond. The air in the car had shifted. It wasn't the rain anymore, but something about the way he was sitting in his seat, his eyes locked on me, made the car feel smaller. He was still staring at me, unblinking. My hands gripped the steering wheel a little tighter. You should probably get out when we hit the next exit, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. He didn't move. Didn't say a word for a long time. I glanced at him, just as the headlights cut through the rain. Hey, I said. Before I could finish, he suddenly reached forward, grabbing the door handle like he was about to throw it open. I swerved to the side, almost hitting the guardrail. My heart pounded in my chest as I tried to regain control of the car. Stop! I yelled, my voice shaking now. He let go of the handle, but he was still staring at me, his face twisted into something I couldn't quite read. You think I'm just gonna let you tell me what to do? You think I'm just gonna get out when you say so? The rain was pounding harder now, and the headlights barely cut through it. I tried to focus on the road, my hands slipping on the wheel. What the hell is wrong with you? I said, my voice shaky. You're not as nice as you think, he muttered. You picked me up, so you deal with me now. I was starting to panic, but I tried not to show it. I didn't want to make him angrier. I'll pull over at the next exit, I said. You can get out there. He was quiet for a moment. Then he leaned back in his seat and chuckled. It wasn't a laugh, it was a low, eerie sound, like he was mocking me. You think I'm gonna get out? After all this? I looked at him again, this time fully aware of the danger. He wasn't planning on leaving. I knew it then, but I wasn't sure what to do. You need to get out, I said again, my voice firm, but my heart was racing. But now he just grinned. It was a slow, deliberate smile, and something in it made me want to vomit. You don't get it, do you? I'm not getting out, he said. I was trembling now, but I wasn't about to let him have control. I quickly reached for my phone, planning to call for help, but before I could do anything, he reached across the seat and grabbed my wrist. His fingers were like iron, digging into my skin. You can't just call someone, he hissed. I yanked my wrist away, my mind racing. I had to think fast. I couldn't let him control this situation. I focused on the road, trying to remain calm, even though panic was rising inside me. I remembered the gun I kept in the glove box. I had never used it, but I had it there for situations like this. He must have seen the shift in my expression because he leaned forward, his face inches from mine. "You think that'll help?" he whispered, his breath hot and rank in my face. But before I could react, I saw the lights of another car in the distance. Relief flooded me, and for a split second, I thought I might get out of this alive. The car was close, and I steered toward it. My foot slammed on the gas, and I cut across 2 lanes to get behind the other vehicle. I looked in my rearview mirror and saw the hitchhiker still watching me, his eyes burning into the back of my skull. I wasn't safe yet, but I was getting closer. I couldn't go back to the road we'd been on, but I could keep driving. I had to keep driving, away from him, away from whatever the hell he had planned. When I finally found a gas station and stopped, I jumped out of the car, locked the doors, and ran inside. I didn't stop until I was inside, safe. The stranger never followed me inside, but I swear I saw him standing outside in the rain, watching me through the window. It was supposed to be a fun road trip. My wife, Rachel, and I had been planning this for months. We were taking the kids Olivia, who's 9, and Ethan, who's 12, on a week-long trip across the state. The plan was simple: drive through a few small towns, hit some parks, and just enjoy the time away. Everything was going smoothly until it wasn't. We were about 4 hours into the trip when Rachel, who was driving, suggested we take a scenic route off the highway. The GPS was showing a back road that cut through some woods and farmland. I thought it sounded nice. It'd give us a break from the monotonous highway and might make for some good photos. Besides, we had plenty of time. We took the turn and started down the narrow road. It felt like we were in the middle of nowhere. There were no other cars, no houses, just endless stretches of trees. As we drove on, I started to feel uneasy. There was something off about the place, but I couldn't put my finger on it. The trees grew thick on either side of the road, and there was a stillness in the air, like the whole world was holding its breath. It didn't help that the sun was starting to set. The road twisted and turned, getting narrower the farther we went. My daughter Olivia started to complain that it was getting dark, and even Ethan seemed to be getting restless in the back seat. I figured it would just be a few more miles, so I told Rachel to keep going, but my gut told me something wasn't right. There was a nagging feeling that maybe we had gone too far. "Hey, do you think we should turn back?" I asked Rachel, trying to sound casual. "I think we're fine," she said, but I could hear the hesitation in her voice. "We'll just check the map again. I'll find us a spot to turn around soon." That's when we saw it. A small town. It wasn't on the GPS, and I didn't remember passing any signs. But there it was, right at the end of the road. A place that looked like it belonged in the past. The buildings were old, rundown, some with broken windows and boarded-up doors. The streetlights flickered as we drove through the empty main street. There wasn't a soul in sight. Rachel slowed the car to a crawl. I noticed an old gas station on the corner, the kind you see in movies, and a diner with its lights still on. But there was no one around. No cars. No people. Just the eerie quiet. "This doesn't feel right," I said, more to myself than to Rachel. "Maybe we should ask someone for directions," Rachel suggested. She sounded just as uncomfortable as I felt. We pulled into the gas station. The place was small, dusty, and the pumps looked ancient. I got out and walked over to the attendant, a middle-aged man who was sitting behind the counter, staring at a small TV. He didn't even look up as I approached. "Hey, we're a little lost." We took a wrong turn, and we were wondering how to get back to the main road. The man slowly lifted his eyes to meet mine. His face was expressionless, and his eyes were dull, almost lifeless. "You shouldn't be here," he said flatly. I laughed nervously. "I'm sorry, I didn't catch that." "You shouldn't be here," he repeated, his voice low, almost threatening. I glanced back at the car, where Rachel and the kids were waiting. "We're just passing through," I said, trying to keep the situation light. "Don't stay long," the man said. He finally stood up, walking slowly towards the back of the station without another word. I watched him disappear into the shadows of the building. I was starting to get a bad feeling about this place. Something about the way he looked at me, the way he spoke, it wasn't right. I went back to the car quickly. "Rachel, we need to go. Now." Rachel frowned. "What happened?" "Just get us out of here," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "This place is off." We didn't drive more than a couple hundred yards before we saw the first person. A man, standing on the side of the road. He was tall, thin, and wearing an old, tattered jacket. His face was pale, with hollow cheeks, and he was staring directly at us as we passed. I didn't make eye contact, but I couldn't shake the feeling that he was watching us. "That was weird," Rachel muttered under her breath. "What do you think that guy was about?" "I don't know, but I don't want to find out," I said, looking back at the man in the rearview mirror. "I think we should just turn around." We turned around, but by the time we reached the spot where we entered the town, there was another man standing in the road, blocking our path. He wasn't moving, just standing there, staring at us with a cold, calculating look. Rachel slammed on the brakes, and we came to a stop a few feet from him. The man didn't flinch. He just stood there, staring at the car. "Get out of the way!" I shouted through the windshield, my pulse quickening. "We need to leave." The man didn't move. My heart was pounding now. I didn't know what these people were doing here, but they weren't making any effort to help us. They were just watching us like we were prey. Rachel backed the car up, turning in the opposite direction, but before we could go far, another man appeared, this one much closer. He was leaning against a lamppost, casually smoking a cigarette. "Do you have a problem?" I yelled at him, my voice shaking. "We don't want any trouble. We just need to leave." The man took a long drag of his cigarette and threw it on the ground. He slowly straightened up and took a step toward the car. "You're not going anywhere," he said quietly, but there was something in his tone that made it clear this was not a conversation. "Rachel, go! Now!" I shouted. Rachel hit the gas pedal, and we sped away, tires screeching as we turned down the narrow road. I kept my eyes on the rearview mirror, half expecting to see the men following us. We didn't stop until we were back on the main highway, far away from that strange town. My hands were shaking, my heart still racing. The rest of the trip was quiet. Too quiet. We never talked about what happened. But we all knew. We were lucky to get out of there in one piece. And I swear, to this day, I can still see those faces in the rearview mirror, watching us as we drove away. It happened a few months ago, but I still can't shake the feeling of what happened that night. I've told a few people about it, but I don't think anyone really gets how scary it was. I still don't fully understand how I ended up in that situation. It all started when I finished my work late one evening. I'm in marketing, and sometimes I'm stuck in the office for hours after everyone else leaves. It was around 11 p.m., and I just wanted to get home. Normally, I take the subway, but it was a Friday, and the trains always feel a little sketchy that late, so I decided to order a rideshare instead. I opened the app, booked a ride, and went outside to wait. I stood by the curb, scrolling through my phone, not really paying much attention to what was going on around me. I was tired and ready to get home. A few minutes later, I saw the car pull up. The app said the name and the car model, so I walked over to it and opened the door without thinking much about it. The driver, a man, looked a little older than me, maybe in his late 30s or early 40s. He didn't seem unusual. He smiled at me when I got in, which I returned with a tired nod. He didn't say anything at first, so I just buckled my seatbelt and settled in, expecting to hear the usual small talk. But instead, he started driving without asking for confirmation or anything. It wasn't until we had driven for a few minutes that I noticed something was off. The route didn't feel familiar. I live in a part of the city that's pretty straightforward to get to from downtown, but we seemed to be heading in the opposite direction. I thought maybe he was taking an alternate route or something, but the streets were getting emptier and less familiar. At first, I didn't say anything. I figured maybe I had just misjudged the route in my tired state. But after about 10 minutes of driving down roads I didn't recognize, I started to get anxious. "Excuse me," I said, my voice a little shaky. "This isn't the way to my place." The driver didn't respond at first, just kept his hands on the wheel, his eyes on the road. I tried again. "Hey, I think you missed my turn. Can you turn around?" That's when he finally spoke. His voice was calm, almost too calm. "No, we're going the right way." I could hear a slight accent in his voice, but it was hard to place. His eyes stayed locked on the road. I felt a knot in my stomach, but I tried to reason with myself. Maybe he was just tired. Maybe he wasn't paying attention. Still, something about the way he said it didn't sit right with me. "Listen, I'm not sure where we're going, but I need to get home," I said, trying to keep my tone polite but firm. "Could you please turn around?" He glanced at me quickly, just a quick flick of his eyes, before looking back at the road. "You don't need to worry about it. I'll take care of it." I couldn't make sense of what was happening. At this point, I started to feel a little panicked. My phone was on the passenger seat beside me, and I considered texting a friend or calling someone. But something in my gut told me not to. I didn't want to give him any reason to get more defensive or angry. We kept driving for what felt like an eternity, passing familiar streetlights that grew more sparse the farther we went. The streets turned darker, and the buildings started to look less like the city and more like empty industrial areas. "Where are we going?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "This is getting too far out. I need to go home." The driver didn't answer right away. The silence felt suffocating. I thought maybe he hadn't heard me, but then he said something so quiet, I almost didn't catch it. "You'll be fine. Just relax." That's when I started to really panic. The rational part of me wanted to get out, but I didn't know where we were, and I had no idea if I'd even be able to get another ride back. There was nothing around us but dark roads. I tried the door handle, but it was locked. I pulled harder, but it wouldn't budge. "Please let me out," I said, trying to keep my voice calm, even though my heart was racing. "I need to get out of the car now." The driver's grip on the wheel tightened. He didn't look at me, but I could tell he was aware of what I had said. He didn't speak for a long time, and I started to feel like I was suffocating in the small space. "Don't make this difficult," he finally said, his voice colder now. It was like a switch had flipped. "You'll get out when I say so." I couldn't believe it. This wasn't happening. I was in a car with a stranger, headed somewhere I didn't know, with no way to get out. The panic hit me hard, and I started to think about what my options were. I could try to jump out when we stopped, But what if we were somewhere with no one around? What if he came after me? I wasn't strong enough to fight him off. The car slowed down, and I immediately braced myself. My heart felt like it was going to explode. I didn't know if he was going to stop and let me go or if he was going to hurt me. "Stop the car," I demanded, my voice trembling. "Let me out right now." He glanced over at me again, but his expression hadn't changed. It was like he was enjoying my fear. "We're almost there," he said, as if I should just trust him. That's when I couldn't take it anymore. I reached for my phone and started tapping furiously. I knew I had to make a call, even if it was just to alert someone to what was happening. I dialed 911, trying to keep my hands steady as the car turned onto an even darker road. Before I could say anything to the dispatcher, the driver jerked the wheel, making the car swerve slightly. He looked at me then, finally meeting my eyes with a menacing glare. "Hang up," he ordered. "Now." I didn't even think. I hit the red button to end the call. My heart was thundering in my chest. I had no idea if I had just made things worse or saved myself. I took a deep breath and tried to gather myself. I needed to act quickly. "Listen," I said, my voice much more firm now. "I'm going to call the police. You can't do this." He didn't say anything for a moment, then nodded. It was almost like he had made up his mind about something. Finally, he slowed the car and pulled over to the side of the road. "Get out," he said flatly. I didn't ask questions. I opened the door, ran out of the car, and didn't stop until I was far enough away that I could barely see the car's headlights in the distance. My legs felt like jelly, and I was breathing so fast I thought I might pass out. I don't know what would have happened if I hadn't gotten out when I did. I don't know if I'd be here writing this. But I never took a rideshare again after that night, and I don't plan to anytime soon. The move was supposed to be a fresh start. Our family needed it. The neighborhood seemed perfect: quiet streets, neat lawns, and friendly neighbors. On the first day, while we were unloading the truck, a man from across the street came over to introduce himself. He looked to be in his late 50s, tall and wiry, with a neatly trimmed beard and a wide smile. He held a pie in his hands, saying it was a welcome gift. His name was Mr. Clark. "It's such a nice area," he said. "You'll love it here. Everyone looks out for each other." We thanked him, and he lingered for a while, chatting about the neighborhood. He pointed out other houses, telling us who lived where. He seemed kind, maybe a little too interested, but I brushed it off. He was just being friendly, I thought. Over the next couple of weeks, we saw him often. Mr. Clark would wave whenever we were outside, and he'd sometimes wander over to talk. He always seemed to know what was going on, like when our Wi-Fi wasn't working one morning. "Must be the line," he said, walking over as I struggled with my phone on the porch. "Happens sometimes. I can call the utility company for you if you want." I told him it wasn't necessary, but he stayed a little too long, asking about what kind of work I did, how old our kids were, and if we had any plans for the weekend. His questions felt polite at first, but there was something about the way he asked them, like he was trying to piece something together. One evening, my wife noticed him standing in his yard. It was nearly midnight, and he wasn't doing anything, just standing there, looking in our direction. "Do you think he's all right?" she asked. I shrugged. Probably just taking a walk or something. But he wasn't walking. He stayed there for at least 15 minutes before finally going back inside. The next day, I saw him again, this time in the morning. He was leaning on the fence between our yards, watching as our kids played in the backyard. I stepped outside to talk to him, trying to be polite but firm. "Everything okay, Mr. Clark?" I asked. He smiled, that same wide grin from the first day. "Oh, just enjoying the morning. You've got a lovely family." I nodded, not sure how to respond. He stayed there for a few minutes before walking back to his house. As the weeks went by, the sightings became more frequent. Late at night, early in the morning, even in the middle of the afternoon, he'd be there, standing in his yard, on the sidewalk, or near the fence, always facing our house. It started to feel less like friendliness and more like surveillance. One night, I was taking out the trash when I noticed him standing at the edge of our driveway. He didn't say anything, didn't move, just stood there, watching. "Mr. Clark," I called out. "Do you need something?" He didn't respond right away, but after a long pause, he said, "Just making sure everything's okay over here." That was the first time I felt genuinely uneasy. My wife suggested we install some cameras. It seemed extreme at first, but I agreed. We set up a few around the house, one by the front door, one in the backyard, and another covering the driveway. The first night after we installed them, I checked the footage out of curiosity. It was mostly empty frames, just the occasional car passing by or a raccoon in the yard. But at around 2 a.m., the backyard camera caught him. He was standing just outside our fence, staring toward the house. I woke my wife, and we watched the clip together. She wanted to call the police, but I wasn't sure what we'd say. He hadn't done anything illegal, at least not yet. The next day, I confronted him. "Mr. Clark, I saw you in our yard last night," I said, keeping my tone as neutral as possible. His smile didn't waver. "Just checking on things. You never know what kind of people might be around." I told him we didn't need anyone checking on us and asked him to stay off our property. He nodded but didn't seem bothered. That night, I checked the cameras again. Around 3 a.m., he was there, this time on our back porch. He stood by the door for several minutes, looking through the glass, before stepping back and walking away. My heart was racing as I watched the footage. This wasn't just weird anymore, it was a threat. I called the police, and they sent someone over to take a report. The officer was polite but didn't seem too concerned. "Without any actual damage or forced entry, there's not much we can do," he said. I showed him the footage, and he agreed to talk to Mr. Clark. The next day, I saw a patrol car parked outside his house. The officers were inside for about 20 minutes before leaving. Mr. Clark came out afterward, smiling and waving like nothing had happened. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every noise made me jump, every shadow seemed like him. Around 4 a.m., I finally drifted off, only to be woken by the sound of the backyard camera alert. I grabbed my phone and opened the app. He was on the porch again, this time trying the handle. I didn't hesitate. I called 911 and stayed on the line until the police arrived. They caught him still in the yard. He didn't resist, didn't even try to explain himself. They took him away, and we got a restraining order the next day. I don't know what his intentions were, and I don't want to know. We've added more cameras, stronger locks, and motion lights. But even now, months later, I still wake up in the middle of the night, half expecting to see him standing there. It started on a Wednesday morning, one of those quiet days where nothing seems out of place. I was home alone, working in my makeshift office near the front of the house. The neighborhood was still, with most people off at work or school. The only sounds were the occasional car passing by and the faint hum of the heater kicking in. Around 10 o'clock, there was a knock at the door. Not a casual tap-tap, but 3 firm knocks. It startled me enough that I jumped, spilling some coffee onto my desk. I wasn't expecting anyone, and the doorbell hadn't rung. I debated ignoring it, but curiosity won out. When I opened the door, a man stood on the porch. He was middle-aged, clean-shaven, and dressed in a plain button-up shirt and slacks. He carried a clipboard and wore a badge clipped to his pocket. The badge looked official enough, though I couldn't make out what it said from where I stood. "Good morning," he said with a polite smile. "Sorry to bother you. I'm with the city's survey department. We're conducting property evaluations in the area, and I just need to confirm a few details about your home." His tone was professional, his demeanor calm. There was nothing inherently alarming about him, but something felt off. I couldn't put my finger on it. Maybe it was how he kept glancing past me, like he was trying to look inside the house. "Ah, sure," I said, hesitantly. "What do you need to know?" He looked down at his clipboard and flipped through a few papers. "I just need to verify some basic information. Number of bedrooms, bathrooms, square footage, things like that. It's for the city records." I hesitated. Wouldn't that information already be on file? His smile didn't falter, but there was a slight pause before he answered. "Sometimes the records aren't updated accurately. It's just a quick confirmation." I didn't love the idea of giving out details about my house to a stranger, even one claiming to be from the city. "Do you have any identification?" I asked, keeping my hand on the door. "Of course," he said, reaching for the badge on his pocket. He held it up, but not close enough for me to see it clearly. "See? Official surveyor. I can give you a contact number if you'd like to confirm." Something about the way he said it made my stomach twist. His badge looked generic, the kind you could order online. The name on it didn't match the department logo. My gut told me this wasn't right, and I decided to trust it. "I'm sorry," I said firmly, "but I'm not comfortable sharing information about my home. If you need anything, you can contact me through the proper channels." His smile faded, and his expression shifted ever so slightly. It wasn't anger, but something colder. "All right," he said after a moment, his tone still polite but clipped. "No problem. Have a good day." He turned and walked away, heading down the driveway toward the street. I watched him go, noting how he didn't stop at any of my neighbors' houses. He just got into a gray sedan parked a few houses down and drove off. I stood there for a moment, trying to shake the uneasy feeling that settled over me. The encounter didn't sit right, but I convinced myself it was probably nothing. Maybe he was legit, and I'd just been overly cautious. Better safe than sorry, I told myself. That night, I locked the doors and windows as usual. I double-checked everything, even though I didn't always do that. It wasn't paranoia, I told myself, just being careful. The next morning, I found the back gate open. It wasn't broken or hanging off its hinges, just unlatched. I knew I had closed it the day before because I'd let the dog out after lunch. I always made a point to latch it afterward. I walked around the yard, looking for anything out of place. That's when I noticed faint footprints in the dirt near the side of the house. They were too big to be mine and too fresh to be old. I knelt down to get a better look, and my heart sank. They led straight to one of the windows. The window screen had been tampered with. It wasn't torn, but it had been partially pried away from the frame. Whoever did it didn't get inside. The window was still locked, but the attempt was clear. Someone had been here. My mind immediately went to the city surveyor from the day before. His questions, his clipboard, the way he looked past me into the house, it all clicked. He wasn't from the city. He had been scouting my home, testing whether I'd be an easy target. I called the police and filed a report. The officer who came to the house listened carefully as I described the man and what had happened. He nodded as I spoke, his expression grim. "This isn't the first time we've heard about something like this," he said. "There's been a few reports of people posing as utility workers or city officials to gain access to homes." He took down all the details I could remember, the man's appearance, his car, the fake badge, and assured me they'd investigate. But there wasn't much they could do without more information. "Just be vigilant," he said before leaving. "If you see him again, call us immediately." For the next few days, I felt like I was living in a bubble of paranoia. Every noise outside made me jump. I kept all the blinds closed and checked the locks multiple times a day. I even installed a camera above the front door, something I'd been meaning to do for months but had always put off. Then, a week later, I spotted the gray sedan parked down the street again. It was the same car, I was sure of it. It sat there for hours, the windows tinted so dark I couldn't see inside. I called the police, but by the time they arrived, the car was gone. I haven't seen the man since, but the experience has stayed with me. It's the kind of thing that makes you question everything, that makes you second-guess every knock at the door. I still don't know what he was planning, but I'm grateful I trusted my instincts that day. It might have saved me from something far worse. I didn't think much of it at first, honestly. It seemed like a typical stop, a little roadside stall selling fresh fruits and vegetables. My partner, Emma, and I were on our way back from a weekend road trip to the mountains, and we had been driving for hours. We needed a break, something to stretch our legs, and a small part of me was hoping for some fresh peaches or cherries to snack on as we continued the drive. The stall was tucked away along a quiet stretch of highway, just outside of a small town. It wasn't a particularly busy area, but it was the perfect spot for someone to sell local produce. The man behind the counter looked to be in his late 40s, with a thick gray beard and a weathered face that told the story of a life spent outdoors. He wore a flannel shirt, jeans, and a pair of old boots. Nothing too unusual, nothing that made me suspicious at first. We approached the stand and started browsing. There were baskets of tomatoes, cucumbers, and green beans, and the smell of ripe fruit filled the air. It wasn't anything fancy, but the produce looked fresh, probably picked that morning. Emma was already eyeing a bag of apples when the man spoke up. "Good choice," he said, his voice deep and gravelly. "But you know, I've got a much better selection in my place. If you're looking for something real special, I can show you." I turned toward him, half listening, still looking over the apples. "Oh yeah?" I asked, just to be polite. He nodded eagerly, his hands clasped on the counter. I've got all kinds of stuff at my house, peppers, squash, berries, you name it. It's just a little ways down the road. You two look like you've been driving for a while. Might be nice to get a little break and see what I've got." I glanced at Emma, who had stopped looking at the apples and was now staring at the man. She had a strange look on her face, the kind of expression that made me pause. She didn't say anything, though, and I didn't want to overthink it. People make small talk at roadside stands all the time, right? But something about his demeanor rubbed me the wrong way. It wasn't anything specific at first, just the way he was leaning forward over the counter, almost too eager. His eyes seemed a little too wide, his smile a little too practiced. "We don't need anything too special, really," I said, trying to brush it off. "We're just looking for a few things to snack on." The man's smile faltered for a second, but then he quickly recovered. "Oh, I understand. But you know, most people don't get to see the good stuff unless they come out to my house." You won't find anything like it anywhere else. I felt Emma's hand on my arm, her fingers tight, like she was silently telling me to hurry up. I looked at her, and there was a nervousness in her eyes I hadn't seen before. She was usually the calm one, the one who made me feel safe, but now she was the one who seemed unsettled. I forced a smile and nodded. "Maybe next time," I said, starting to step back from the stall. But he didn't back off. Instead, he stood up straighter, his expression shifting. It wasn't angry, no, it was something colder, more calculating. He stepped out from behind the counter, his hands still resting casually on the wooden edge. "I'm just trying to offer a little something extra. You two are welcome to come see it, no pressure. It's not far. I'm sure you'll like what I've got." At this point, I could tell Emma was getting nervous. She took a half step backward, trying to distance herself from him. I looked around, but the road was empty. No other cars were parked, and there weren't any other people in sight. I couldn't shake the feeling that we were alone here, too alone. I wasn't sure what it was, but something about this whole exchange had my spidey senses tingling. "Thanks, but we really should get going," I said, stepping closer to Emma, trying to pull her gently toward the car. The man's smile stayed, but it was different now. It wasn't friendly anymore. It was almost like he knew something we didn't. He took a step toward us, but I held my ground, my hand reaching for Emma's. "You don't need to be so hasty," he said, his voice dropping just a little, and the calm tone seemed to carry a bit more weight now. "I'm just offering some fresh produce, and you two look like you could use a good rest. You could take 5 minutes, maybe. Just a short drive." That was when I felt a real unease flooding through me. My hand tightened around the car keys in my pocket, and I could feel Emma's pulse quicken beside me. "Look, I don't know who you think you are, but we're fine. We don't need your help," I said firmly, hoping to end the conversation. The man's eyes narrowed slightly, his lips pulling into something that wasn't quite a smile anymore. "I'm just trying to offer a better deal. A good place to stop. You're making a mistake." I could tell then he wasn't just trying to sell us fruit. He was trying to get us somewhere. I don't know what his plan was, but I wasn't about to stick around to find out. "We're good, thank you," I said one last time, and I grabbed Emma's hand, leading her toward the car. We didn't look back as we walked quickly, and the whole time, I could feel the man's gaze on us. I opened the door to the car, slid into the driver's seat, and slammed the door behind me. "Drive," Emma said in a low voice. It wasn't a suggestion, it was an order. I didn't question it. I put the car in reverse and backed out of the parking space. As I turned around to head back onto the road, I glanced in the rearview mirror. The man was still standing there, watching us, his posture stiff. But this time, there was something else in his eyes, something dark, like he knew exactly what he was doing. I didn't tell Emma right away, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we had just narrowly avoided something bad. We didn't talk much for the next few miles, both of us lost in our thoughts. Emma kept glancing at the road behind us, like she expected to see his car following. I was hoping I was just being paranoid, but part of me knew better. It wasn't the first time I'd seen someone who looked harmless at first but then turned out to have much darker intentions. And I wouldn't make that mistake again. I'm just glad we got out of there before it was too late. I still can't shake off what happened that weekend. It was supposed to be a relaxing getaway, just a couple of days in the woods with a few friends, nothing special. A chance to get away from the hustle, enjoy some fresh air, and have a break from the usual grind. I'd been hiking a few times before, so I knew what to expect. But that weekend? It turned into something completely different. We drove up on Friday afternoon, just as the sun was starting to set. There were 5 of us, me, my brother James, his girlfriend Sarah, and 2 of our friends, Dan and Laura. We found a spot deep in the woods, far enough away from any major trails. It was quiet, peaceful, just how we wanted it. We set up camp, built a fire, and spent the evening talking, laughing, and drinking beers. We didn't think about much, just enjoying the moment. Saturday was pretty uneventful. We hiked, explored a bit, and spent the day relaxing by the river. We had a good dinner, played some card games, and then went to bed early because we were all exhausted from the hike. The night was quiet, the kind of peaceful silence you can only get when you're far away from city noise. We fell asleep with no problems at all. But when we woke up on Sunday morning, everything felt off. The weather was fine, but there was something in the air that made me uneasy. I couldn't put my finger on it. The others didn't seem to notice, though. We packed up our things, folded the tents, and were about ready to head back to the car. That's when things started to go wrong. We had parked the car just off the main road, about a quarter of a mile from our campsite. It was tucked into a small clearing, hidden enough that we didn't worry about it being visible from the main trail. We all made our way back down the path, talking and laughing, until we came to the clearing. That's when we saw it. The car looked fine from a distance, but as we got closer, I noticed something. The tires. Every single one of them was slashed. Flat as a pancake. And as I walked around the back, I saw the engine hood was open. My heart started to race. I looked at James, who looked just as confused as I felt. "Who the hell would do this?" he muttered, walking toward the hood. I didn't know what to say. It was just wrong. Why would anyone be out here? The place we were camping wasn't exactly easy to get to. It wasn't like someone could just casually wander by. We hadn't seen anyone else on the trails the whole time we were there. It didn't make any sense. James looked under the hood, poking around. It's tampered with. Someone's been messing with the engine. There's no way this happened overnight. "What do you mean?" Sarah asked, her voice shaky. "What do you think happened?" "I don't know," he said, standing up and wiping his hands on his jeans. "But it's not good. I think we're stuck here." "Stuck?" Dan said, his voice rising. "You're telling me we're stuck out here?" "How?" "We're miles from the nearest town. We can't just walk back." We all stood there, staring at the car in disbelief. I could see the panic creeping into everyone's faces. It was supposed to be a simple trip. We were supposed to drive back and enjoy the rest of the day. But now, we were stranded. And someone had clearly done this on purpose. "We need to call for help," I said, trying to keep calm, even though I could feel my own nerves starting to fray. "Maybe someone can come get us." "Good luck with that," Laura said, holding up her phone. "There's no signal out here. Remember?" She was right. We hadn't had any reception since we started the hike, and now there was no way to contact anyone. It was just the 5 of us, stuck in the middle of nowhere. I paced around the car, trying to think. There had to be something we could do. But when I looked at the damage again, it became clear someone had deliberately destroyed the car. The tires were slashed clean through. The engine was messed with in a way that made it obvious it wasn't some random vandal. This was intentional. Someone wanted us stuck here. I felt the air grow heavier, like the forest around us was closing in. The peaceful getaway had turned into something darker. I couldn't stop thinking about the possibility of whoever had done this still being nearby, watching us, waiting. "We need to figure out what to do," James said. "We can't just sit here." "We could try to hike out," I suggested. "It's not far to the road. Maybe we can flag someone down, get a tow truck or something." But no one seemed too keen on that idea. It was starting to get late in the afternoon, and we were already exhausted from the hike the day before. None of us were in any condition to walk the distance, especially with the heavy feeling hanging over us. No one said it, but we all knew it. It wasn't just the car that was messed up. Something was wrong here. Someone had gone out of their way to trap us. We sat around the car for a while, trying to figure out what to do next. It felt like every second that passed, the weight of the situation just kept getting heavier. The trees around us, once just part of a nice forest, now seemed to press in closer. The whole world felt quieter, like we were being watched, even though we didn't see anything out of place. Then, just as we were starting to talk about maybe going on foot, we heard something. A noise. A branch snapping in the woods. We all froze. Everyone turned to look, their eyes wide with the same realization. We weren't alone. For what felt like forever, we stood there, barely breathing, listening. But the noise didn't come again. It could have been an animal, just the wind, or maybe a trick of the mind. But in that moment, it didn't matter. What mattered was that we had no way out. No way to know who or what had done this to us. We made a decision then, even though it felt impossible. We would try to walk out. Stick together. The whole time, I kept glancing over my shoulder, expecting to see someone or something lurking in the shadows. Every crack of a branch, every rustle in the leaves felt like someone was getting closer. It wasn't an easy hike out. It was a long, exhausting trek, made worse by the growing sense of fear that hung over us. But we finally made it to a place where we could get a signal on our phones, and after what felt like hours, we managed to get through to someone who could help. They showed up and towed us back to town. We didn't look back at the woods as we drove away. None of us said much during the ride. We were all just too shaken. To this day, I still don't know who did it or why. But I can't shake the feeling that we were being watched the whole time. We got out safe, yes. But something about that weekend, it wasn't just the car. It was the feeling that we were never meant to leave. I still can't shake the feeling. The cold, wet air. The sound of my own breath mixed with the pounding rain. And that feeling of someone watching, someone just behind me, every step of the way. It started like any other run. I was out on my usual route, the kind of run I do when I need to clear my head. The rain had been coming down hard all day, and I wasn't about to let that stop me. I had my head up, my shoes splashing through the puddles, and the rhythmic sound of my footsteps in my ears. The world felt distant, the streets quieter than usual, the kind of night where everything seems muffled by the storm. It wasn't until I was about halfway through that I noticed it. At first, I thought it was just the noise of the rain, maybe some stray footsteps from someone else running nearby. But then I realized. The footsteps were too close, too in sync with mine. I tried to ignore it, told myself it was just my imagination, but it didn't stop. Every time I picked up the pace, the footsteps behind me quickened. Every time I slowed down, they slowed too. I glanced over my shoulder once, quickly, just to see if anyone was there. Nothing. Just the rain, the street lights reflecting off the wet pavement. But when I turned my head back, I could hear it again, the footsteps, still right behind me. I could feel my heart starting to race, the anxiety creeping up in my chest. Who would be out here in this weather, running so close? I sped up, thinking maybe I was just paranoid, but they kept matching my pace. The sound of those steps, heavy, deliberate, was starting to make my skin crawl. I had to stop. I needed to see who it was, to confront them. If someone was behind me, they were clearly following me, and I wasn't about to be caught unaware. I turned sharply to the side, slipping slightly on the wet pavement as I came to a stop, but still keeping my eyes on the street behind me. My breath was coming out in clouds, but I couldn't stop looking, couldn't stop listening. For a moment, I heard nothing. No footsteps, no movement. The rain kept falling, louder now, the only sound in the empty street. Then I heard it again. The footsteps. But this time, they were closer. I tensed, standing there in the rain, just waiting. My nerves were shot, every muscle in my body screaming for me to either run or confront whoever it was. I chose to turn around and face whatever was coming. And there he was. A man, just a few feet away, standing in the rain, looking at me with this intense, unsettling stare. I couldn't see much of his face. He had a dark hoodie pulled up over his head, the fabric soaked through. His hands were shoved deep into the pockets of his jacket, but I could tell his posture was stiff, almost like he was waiting for something. I took a breath, trying to stay calm. "You following me?" I asked, my voice shaky but firm. The man didn't answer at first. He just stood there, staring at me. I felt the tension between us building, something in the air thickening with the promise of something bad. My pulse was racing, and I could feel my legs starting to shake. But I wasn't about to let him see that. Finally, he spoke. His voice was low, almost a growl. "You're in my way." I didn't know what he meant by that. I didn't know if he was talking about the street or something else, but his tone was all wrong. There was no reason for him to be this close, this intense. I didn't know if he was threatening me or just crazy, but I knew I had to get out of there. I took a step back, trying to put some space between us. "I'm just running." "I don't want any trouble," I said, keeping my voice as calm as I could, though inside, I was panicking. The man didn't move. He just stood there, still staring at me. And then, before I could even think, he took a step forward. It was sudden, fast, and without warning. I froze, my feet rooted to the wet pavement. "What do you want?" I demanded, louder now, more desperate. I had to keep control. I had to. I wasn't about to get caught in this situation. But as I stepped back again, he took another step closer, closing the distance between us. The man's eyes narrowed. "I'm not done with you," he said, each word dripping with something dark, something threatening. I turned and ran. I didn't think about it, didn't hesitate for a second. I bolted down the street, heart pounding in my chest, every step faster than the last. The sound of the rain in my ears, the sloshing of my shoes in the puddles, none of it mattered. I couldn't hear anything but my own frantic breath and those footsteps, now echoing in time with mine. He was still behind me. I could hear him gaining on me. I didn't look back. I couldn't. But I could feel his presence, like he was inches away, waiting for the right moment to grab me. The rain was coming down harder now, a blur of water, and I could barely see. My legs burned with the effort, but I couldn't stop. Not now. Not when I had no idea what this man wanted or how far he was willing to go. I turned down a side street, hoping to lose him, hoping he would just give up and turn away. But the footsteps didn't stop. They were right there. Closer now. I didn't know what he would do when he caught me. I didn't want to find out. I spotted a row of houses up ahead, the lights from the windows offering a glimmer of safety. I pushed myself harder, pumping my legs, not daring to slow down. I was almost there. I was almost safe. Then, just as I reached the sidewalk near the houses, the footsteps stopped. The sound of them, the heavy, deliberate steps, just cut off. For a second, I thought maybe he had given up. I didn't want to risk looking back, but something told me that it was too quiet now. Too still. I slowed my pace, but I didn't stop. I kept walking, the anxiety still crawling under my skin, the feeling of being hunted lingering in the air. And just as I was about to turn the corner, I heard the voice again. Low. Menacing. "You can't run forever." I didn't stop running until I was inside the first house I found, knocking frantically on the door, not even caring if I looked crazy. When the door opened, I practically collapsed, still shaking, still drenched from the rain. The woman who answered looked at me in confusion, but when I explained what had happened, she let me in without a word. I don't know how I made it through the rest of the night, but I did. I never saw the man again. But I can't stop thinking about him, about the way he followed me, about the way he spoke, like it wasn't just about running anymore. I don't know if he was just trying to scare me or if he had something worse planned. But the whole night feels like a blur, just the sound of rain and footsteps, and his voice. I haven't gone for a run since.